to share with us?
The only thing I'll add is we did get a grant for this project, and the grant is through DOLA, so they're paying for half the cost. So there is a timeline prescribed. It is important to spend the time that council deems necessary to come to the right conclusion, but the consultants are looking for the direction so they can move forward with those construction plans. Generally speaking, the grant award, the contract would be complete in June, so we just have a few months left to set the team loose to complete the construction business.
Are you advising that we shouldn't take a couple days and maybe a work session?
No, I think we'll just move forward and try to plan a special work session sooner than later.
What would it require to get an extension on that June deadline?
We've done it before. I mean, it does require some work, but although that still, I think, would be our goal is to stick within that timeline. I think if we can get, if you have some time to think about it over the next few days, and we have a special work session, that might work. So,
Time is always of the essence, but a stitch in time saves nine, and a hasty decision leads to that product. I would rather get it right, and if it costs us more to delay the deadline, I think that's money well spent. So
If needed. We're not there yet.
I'm not insisting that we take more time, but I want to make certain that we have a good product, and that when we get done with it, we don't have regrets that we didn't spend a little more time doing this or that. I've got myriad of questions that I'm not going to bring up now because it would take much too long to deal with, but I think this is a great step forward.
Any last comments from the crowd? Please come up.
Thank you, Mayor. As mentioned, I'm Kim Grant. I'm the director of Colorado's Most Endangered Places program for Colorado Preservation Inc. The Belvedere Theater was listed on the Endangered Places program in 2016. And that was done to raise awareness of the importance of the building, to help generate some support for preservation and moving forward. So it's really exciting to see how the plans are moving forward and how you're getting some funding in place. And I just wanted to add, one of the things that we do with our program every year is what's called a weekend workshop. We don't have permission yet from the city to do this. We're thinking about how we could possibly do a weekend volunteer workshop and help clean up the Belvedere Theater. And since there was an audience here tonight, I wanted to just mention to you, if you're ready to get your hands dirty, there's a lot of work to do, but it would not preempt anything they're doing, but it would actually help maybe set the stage for it. So if you're interested in that idea, let me know, and hopefully we can move forward sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Next on our list is a discussion about gaming revenue. It's a pretty important part.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I'll be doing a short presentation on gaming revenue in Colorado, specifically within Central City, Blackhawk, and Cripple Creek. So just to give you a little bit of context and probably review for a lot of you, but back when gaming legislation was established the Limited Gaming Fund, and then more recently, Amendment 50 was passed, which established the Extended Limited Gaming Fund and gave power to the residents in the cities to vote on extended hours, approve more casino games, and higher bet limits. So with those gaming funds, there's a gaming tax levied on casinos' adjusted gross proceeds, which is the tax rate is shown on the right-hand side, and that's the money collected from gamblers minus the amount paid to gamblers in winnings. So in fiscal year 2017-2018, the limited gaming revenue generated $106.1 million, and the extended gaming revenue generated $20.4 million.
So hold on, I think we have a packet, but we don't have.
There were a handful of copies at the back table, I believe.
Okay, we just don't have them here.
Oh,
Yeah, I think we-
my apologies. So with that, the gaming tax, you can see in that chart, it's happening at an accelerating rate, so increasing faster. Looking just at the limited gaming revenue distribution for fiscal year 2017-2018, within the gaming cities, they received 10% of that limited gaming funds. So Central City received 0.9 million, Blackhawk 7.1 million, Cripple Creek 1.5 million, and then the gaming counties received 12% of the limited gaming fund. Dollar County was at 1.9 million and Gilpin was at 9.5 million. Another thing I'd like to point out with the limited gaming fund is 28% of those funds goes towards the Colorado State Historical Fund, and I apologize that it's a little bit small here and hard to see, but those are the three areas that funding is allocated towards for sure, and then afterwards the State Assembly gets to decide how to allocate the rest of the funds. So it's the State Historical Fund, the gaming cities, and gaming counties. And then looking just at the extended limited gaming revenue distribution 2017-2018, I didn't find it broken down within the city and counties, but the gaming cities received $1.7 million, and then gaming counties received $2 million. And then the rest of those proceeds from the extended limited gaming fund goes towards community colleges, and that's 78% towards that. And then it's again the 10% towards cities, 12% towards counties. So looking just at the Colorado State Historical Fund, that's at 28% of the funds from the limited gaming fund. 20% of those funds goes towards the gaming cities again. So this table shows you how it's distributed throughout the three different cities with gaming. You can see that it's corresponding to an increasing rate, similar to what you'd see in the adjusted gross proceeds within the state data. At 2019, the proposed figure is slightly higher than the 2017 actual figure, but it's conservatively smaller than the 2018 projected figure, but it's still correlating with that increasing rate of the adjusted gross proceeds. And then the state gaming tax revenue, this is referring to both tax revenues coming from the limited gaming fund and the extended gaming funds. So within both of those funds, 10% goes towards the gaming cities. So the chart on the left shows you the figures for from 2015 to 2019. And then I put a graph there just to give you a comparison of the three cities, how it all relates. Again, they're all increasing moderately, which we see adjusted gross proceeds from the state. One thing I looked a little bit into is in fiscal year 2017-2018, Central City saw a 12.5% increase compared to that's the percent change, and that's quite larger than what the other cities saw, so that's kind of exciting. And then now I'll shift away from the gaming tax and talk a little bit about the device fees. So Central City has a device fee of $1,265. Blackhawk has a device fee of $1,050, and then they have a device fee for their tables as well, which is $4,020. And Cripple Creek, they do a little more of a unique system. So for the first 50 devices that a casino has, they charge them $600 a year, and then after any device over 50, so if they have 100 devices for the device 51 through 100, they're paying $1,200 per that device. And each city has a portion of the device fee going towards the general fund, and then also in Central City's case, a transportation enterprise fund, and similar with Blackhawk and Cripple Creek, Blackhawk does a transportation fund, but then then Cripple Creek does water and sewer enterprise fund. So just to give you a comparison of the three cities and how much revenue they're getting from the device fees, the table on the left shows you that, and then I did another graph just to show you how it all relates visually more so. And like I said, part of it goes towards the general fund, part of it goes towards enterprise funds, and that kind gives you a little insight of the different structures that they have. Include distinguishing between the different direct costs or direct revenues and indirect revenues. So I talked about the limited gaming fund and how that generates money for the city and county and through the state historical fund, and then the extended gaming fund generates money for each city and county as well. And then there's device fees, but then on the other side, the gaming industry also generates money through sales tax, water fees, and commercial property taxes. And that's all I have on that. If you have any questions, let me know and I can go back to any slide.
Do we have any data thing that happened? Has that been going on enough that we get any data on that yet?
So we don't have any data per se, but we do have some of the results. As you may recall, the proponents of that program needed to meet in their first year an increase year over year of at least 3.5% or more in order to be eligible for a rebate. The year over year, I believe, was at just about 3.15%, so they fell shy of that. That does not mean that they get another shot in their second year to hit 3.5. They actually have that growing each year for the first 3 years of the pilot program. And so that data and information was turned into the Gaming Commission or Gaming Division in end of December. And so that's when the determination was made, and they'll give it a shot again for this next year. So no rebates in the first year.
And that was for the whole state? Or?
Correct.
I have a couple questions. And I don't know where I heard this, but I heard that, and maybe Jack will know, I heard that originally the community college funds were actually supposed to go to a community college in this county. Is that correct?
I have no idea. I don't remember.
Not in state law now, but I think your question is that's what it may have been proposed.
I thought that was, or someone had told me that there's
That goes back.
That's why it was for a community college in the counties where, no?
No, I think that goes back to when they raised the limits. That I think that's when that fund was.
It is. That's the extended gaming, and so that's the portion where a majority of those funds go to community colleges. I don't know if maybe when it started out that was the intent, but I know that the way the law is now is that it's set up for the community colleges as a whole. And
has there ever been a
and they have a board.
college or community college in Gilpin County?
Thank you so much, and thanks for the big print.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so that will end our work session at 6:52. Thank you, everybody. We will convene for a regular session at 7 p.m.
And then
And so we'll be doing that.
The meeting of City Council of Central City to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Fay,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Loretta, Aiken,
Here.
Alderman Mitchell,
Present.
Alderman Heidel.
Please rise and join me in pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Daniel, any additions and or amendments to the agenda tonight?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Council, any conflicts of interest on any agenda items?
I would like to make a disclosure. I don't believe it constitutes a conflict of interest, but I'd like to make a disclosure under that and leave it to the rest of you to decide if there is a conflict of interest. I was contacted today by Arnold Gittin, who had a number of questions and concerns about an item on the agenda tonight, none of which I responded to. It was all a monologue, and I took notes, but that was the extent of it. I do not believe it constitutes a conflict of interest, but I wanted to disclose it.
I was also contacted by Arnold. Didn't really have much of a conversation with him,
Yeah, I think
so just
we all-
listen to him.
Yeah. And Council, I don't think there's any conflict there.
I don't believe being contacted by Mr. Giddens represents a conflict of interest.
Thank you for sharing.
In that case, we will consent agenda. Starting with the bills for this past period. Any questions about the bills yet?
Mr. Mayor, council members, if I may, just wanted to bring your attention to one of the bills on here. Specifically towards the end of that sheet, it's the fifth one up from the bottom, Walker Parker Park. The majority of the new council. There was a question, I believe it was in January from council, and I think specifically about when the results of that study would be completed. And so at that time, and this is still the case now, the study won't be completed until the count is done this summer. We're looking at about July, I believe it is. And then at that point, then all the two counts as well as the analysis. So just wanted to let you know that that's an ongoing process. Essentially what we were trying to do and what we're still trying to do is to establish what in fact the need is for parking. We oftentimes hear requests or demands for additional parking or parking structures, and so that has been the subject of a number of discussions, and so we thought we'd go ahead and update that since we really didn't have a study, a professional study on that. So just wanted to let you know about that.
And did I see a bid study on parking floating around at one time? They have not done one of their own?
I believe that the bid had a parking study done in, it was by BBC, somewhere around 2012. And I believe that was specifically tailored toward some of the proposed designs they had on the, I think it's been called the parking structure on the hillside. But what they have done more recently has been a speed study by a traffic engineer along the parkway. And so that may also be part of what you've heard.
And on the Main Street, I assume that's an annual membership fee to this Downtown Colorado Inc.?
Correct.
And is it a good membership?
Yes, it is.
So that what do they do for us?
DCI provides a number of trainings, conferences, etc. Downtown Colorado Inc. There are panelists that do participate in some of those trainings and workshops that have come to Central City and toured some of our, the Belvedere or some of the other Aqua properties, really just trying to provide technical advice most times. It also, similar to ULI, is an opportunity to be at some of those workshops where not only funding agencies for grants, but then also possible developers.
And is that 2,000, is that part of the Main Street budget, or is that on top of the Main Street budget that the city pays?
I believe that that's inside of or inclusive within.
So we continue to pay their bills, we just audit to make sure that it's within whatever was allocated?
So the Main Street Central City Commission, technically a city commission, also has formed a 501c3, and so that nonprofit status is there. The goal is to eventually transition from the city commission over into a private entity that then can continue on. That is a model that has worked for a number of Main Street communities. The reason we previously had a Main Street Commission, and for a number of reasons, that effort failed, and so this was a way to try to incubate the program, making sure that it was strong enough before we sent it on its way.
We all reviewed the minutes and totality. So, are there any questions there? Judy?
Or is this my duty?
This is Judy time.
I move to approve the consent agenda, which consists of the regular bill list through April 9th and city council minutes April 2nd, 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Approved. Okay, so our first public forum tonight is for agenda items, and we have two signed up. Lisa? Join us, please.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and everyone. For the record, my name is Lisa Laban. I live at 108 Casey. I'm here this evening to request that Resolution R-1909 be tabled. As a fan of the red stained colored concrete that was formerly the design standard, I would appreciate more consideration and discussion regarding the standard for concrete sidewalks within the downtown commercial core. That's all.
That's it. Okay, or
I did.
you're a ditto. Do you want to give us your name and address? For that ditto?
Still 96 Martin Drive.
Okay. Even if you didn't sign up, you're welcome to address the council if you're in the crowd on any of the agenda items at this time. Going once. Going closed. So next we go on to new business. Resolution number 19-7, a resolution of the City Council, City of Central Colorado, conditionally consenting to the assignment of Moroni Ranch Gold Mountain Development Agreement dated May 17, 2011 to Global Funding Partners. Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Resolution 1907 sets forth City Council's conditional consent to the assignment of the 2011 development agreement for Moroni Ranch to Global Funding Partners. I do believe we have representatives here tonight with the current ownership group, as well as the a representative from Global Funding Partners. It is my understanding that Global Funding Partners is attempting to close this transaction by May 10th. The 2011 development agreement does obligate the City Council to consent in advance to any proposed assignment of that development agreement. There is a copy of the assignment and assumption agreement that is in your packet. That is an attachment to the resolution that has been executed by both owners of the subject property as well as by a representative of Global Funding Partners, which is a Delaware limited liability company. I'll stand for any questions that you may have, but there are representatives from the owner, including the owner's broker, that may want to address City Council concerning this specific request as well.
So we welcome them to address the council, but I'll just say right off the bat, I appreciate everyone being here, and I think that you'll find that the majority, if not all of us, are quote-unquote pro-development. We want these things to be happening. That being said, when I was reading through it, we're talking about something that was assigned in 2011. None of us, maybe Marcus was around, but none of the rest of us were here. And it was, a majority of it was a commercial development. And my understanding that we're now going to strictly residential development, is that correct?
Not entirely residential, but majority residential.
I just, and I'm new to this game, so if like attorney says we need to honor that assignment, I would say scrap it, let's start a new one with those of us who are on here. I hear that May 7th date. Maybe you guys can tell us why that's of such vital importance, but that's where I'm coming from at this point. Anyone who wants to speak, please.
All right, I'll go ahead and speak. Mark Van Ark, broker representing the owners. The agreement that is in existence today could still move forward should the original developer come in. That agreement would still stand. In order for that development to occur, there would need to be some adjustments due to the new comp plan and some code changes. By assigning this to global funding, we don't lose global funding as a developer, and it can move forward, and they still need to go through those adjustments just as though the original developer would have had to. So we're not losing anything by assigning it. We're actually gaining a developer that's ready, willing, and able, and may not be here if we had to wait the normal process to start from scratch. You have an existing agreement that if Wedgwood came to the table, would be an active agreement. Adjustments have to be made. By assigning it to global, there's no change to that situation. It still needs to be approved according to the updated comp plan and codes.
So you're saying basically would mirror the same, like they still have to be the same process no matter whose name is on?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I just want to simplify it.
What it prevents is having to go through a 2 or 3 month process to start over, and would end up with the same changes that would have to be made to the existing. It's time saving, and time kills all deals. And if we have to wait for that process, I'm not convinced this transaction would happen.
I have a lot of questions. I can give my 2 cents on that as well.
Please.
Thank you again. Again, my name is Philip Devon. I'm one of the partners looking to acquire the land. So as Mark said, when we first talked to Marcus, there were 2 kind of schools of thought that we could go down. One was what our resolution was 2 weeks ago here, which was potentially to completely scrap the entire agreement, having City Council say that it's voided, which was fine by us to a degree, but it does then put a time constraint on us purchasing the land, because we will not buy the land unless I have an agreement with the city that says I can in fact develop the land. I don't want to spend all that money, buy the land, and find that now I have a natural wildlife preserve, right, when I have ideas. So we wouldn't purchase the land unless we had that agreement, so that would push out our ability to purchase the land and potentially cause some delays from us. So when we were here 2 weeks ago, the new idea is if we could take that existing agreement and just reassign it to us, it would be held in trust in escrow until the day we closed on the land. As soon as we closed on the land, the assignment would be in our name now. Fully understanding that that agreement has to be updated to, I think, 2017 comp plan regulations. But at least it gave us some protection as a developer and now a landowner that there's nothing crazy the city's gonna do kind of without an agreement that says I can't do. I have to Ray, we've talked to Marcus. This seems to be a very clean way to do this, knowing full well that I'm probably spending lots of hours with the city and with Ray going, okay, we have to talk about upgrading your water supply. Can I put, what kind of roads can I put? Do they have to stay dirt? Do they have, I mean, we'll work through all that, but nothing in that working out would preclude us from actually putting some houses up there. Okay, so we're okay with either fashion. The problem became a timing issue so that we're not dragging out. You know, I think we started engaging on purchasing the land little over, just barely over. The weather's supposed to be a little bit nice, sort of. So for us as a developer, we want the land nice so we can start to do some work there. They would like to have the property sold. If we don't do the assignment, you know, talking with Ray the first time I came up here about a month ago or so, you know, that created a new development agreement that could take 2, 3, 4 months. And we would not be comfortable buying unless we had that. So doing the assignment gives us that.
So the original developer is completely backed out, or they are out of the picture? 2 weeks ago, there was some talk that there was like, they could still come forward, or?
So I can give you my 2 cents and I'll let Mark explain his 2 cents. But my 2 cents is this. We're under contract, we're first in line. So I want to buy the land, and I want to have the right from the city that says I can do what I want to do with the land for the benefit of the city. Right? I'm not trying to put something up there that's not going to benefit the city.
Yep.
Okay? There's a secondary buyer that wants the land. Unfortunately for them at this point, they're second in command right now, right? The development agreement is very owner of that agreement, which is Wedgwood, has 0 rights until you become a landowner. So since I'm first in line, if I become that landowner, then I basically either I'm the landowner and I want the development agreement, whether it's reassigned or I create a brand new one. So that's basically where we're at.
So the original guy, he never put forth a contract or anything yet, has he? That you know,
yeah.
I mean, did he ever come forward with anything?
Speak best to that. He has not submitted an offer that was acceptable. This group that you may hear about, I went beyond the gentleman you talked to and spoke with the funding group. And it does not look like they want to have anything to do with the gentleman you spoke with.
Well, the guy I listened to, so.
Yeah, I mean,
so I'm just trying to make this clear that, you know, there's no legally that guy has no foot to stand on.
There is no existing agreement with him. We don't anticipate one simply because we don't believe. We have to vet any potential buyer.
Yeah.
vetting Phil and his group came back successful.
And in fact, I think 2 weeks ago when we submitted this, there was the current ownership actually submitted affidavit saying that they're not under any contract for the other person and they have no intention of selling there. They want to sell to us, barring our development agreement.
What we have is a past developer who would love to keep his hands on this, but he's incapable of doing it financially.
So, Ray or Daniel, are we talking 90 days?
So the concept at this point is to use that as a roadmap and the existing development agreement and fine tune it for what they're looking at. I would hope we could expedite it, but there are a number of factors in the existing development agreement that need to be clarified. And we've already kind of talked about a few of those, but we could potentially expedite it depending on what their time frame is.
Could you give an example of one or two of those things?
So some infrastructure needs to be clearly defined as to who's doing what, who's paying for what. There needs to be some specific benchmarks within the development agreement as to which phases and when those phases would be complete. I think it's in the city's best interest that the development agreement is not as broad and long, holds the city as long as this. I think there needs to be specific ties saying you need to have infrastructure in place in, let's say, years or whatever the case may be. And then the first phase is residential and the second phase is residential and whatever the case may be. But that's a point of negotiation that we're going to be working through in these, if it's assigned to the buyer.
So if I was a developer, I I would want to avoid any ambiguity. I want us to sit at the table and have a new development plan outline exactly this. It just, erasers and pencils make me nervous.
So I agree to some degree. We wanted to have a brand new development agreement at the start. Again, 2 weeks ago, we were going to go down that path, but it seemed like the timing of what I'm not buying it unless I have an inspection. Our level of comfort, okay, was different than the level of comfort of the other developer because he's been involved for 30, 40 years. He basically is a level of comfort that we're not willing to do. And so if we pushed ours out for 90 days or longer till we got to that level of comfort, our personal photos of developers that they may say, okay, we're done, we're gonna go to the other plan. Okay?
Okay, but that's not, it's not our responsibility to work out that relationship.
Nope. And so to your point, Mayor, is we wanted to start fresh so that we had a full, clear understanding, because our reading of the current development agreement, as Ray said, is very broad. Not only broad for the city, but very broad for us. It doesn't define what my obligations are in helping fix the water, or can I put a road that's paved or not paved, things like that. Who's gonna, do many things. But we're at a level of comfort today that if the agreement was just assigned to us, knowing that it doesn't meet the current regulations, that if I have, say, 70 or 80% of that development agreement kind of already baked out, doing the other 20, 30% is not a 90-day process for us. And because of that, then I would be comfortable closing on the deal in the next 2 weeks and working that out. So they're taken care of, I've got some insurances, and we just have to work out the last percentage.
I'm monopolizing this conversation.
I have a question of Marcus. So if we went ahead with this, we don't have any legal liability concerning that first developer. He's not our problem. And, as far as that's just between them and the first developer.
Councilman Akron, I don't believe that the city does. Section 6.1 of the development agreement has language that basically says, notwithstanding anything in this agreement to the contrary, the developer, which is Wedgwood, which was the developer that was contemplated back in 2011, has no rights whatsoever under the agreement unless and until Wedgwood acquires an interest in the property. It has not acquired any interest in the property in the last intervening 8 years. So I cannot see how Wedgwood would claim that they have a right under this agreement. They would have to make some sort of argument akin to that they have an exclusive option to acquire this property for the term of the agreement, which is 15 years. And given that the judiciary will always favor the alienability of property, I can't see how that would be a successful argument. And really what the current ownership group is saying in this assignment and assumption agreement is we want to assign our rights and obligations as the owner of the property that was annexed into the city back in 1999 to this group. And we also want to assign all of the obligations of the developer under this 2011 agreement to Global Funding Partners. If Global Funding Partners, and again, this will not be effective unless and until they close on the property. That's clearly set forth in the assignment and assumption agreement. If they do close on the property, then they would step into the shoes of the owner under that agreement, and they would have the right to then come forward and propose an amendment to that agreement, which would probably not be appropriate until such time as there has been a thorough review of what they actually have proposed for the property. They would go through the city's current, the planning process.
Okay.
They'd be working closely with Ray on that.
Yeah, I think you answered my question. Thanks.
Peter, do you have anything to add?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Do any of the property owners want us to? Or you're represented by the, it's clear that you guys want to move forward with this redesign.
We do, and I think my only question would be for Ray is that what he described that would have to be done to mold this to the current desires of the city would happen under the assignment anyway. So you're wanting to start fresh to end up with a clean document that still takes us down that path.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
I have yet to begin.
Okay.
Questions of me, from the up here?
I've got 3 pages of questions here.
Okay.
So not knowing who to address, I'm going to address them all to Daniel. And he can direct traffic, okay? I'm not an attorney clearly, and I'm certainly not a judge, and I respect what the city attorney has to say about 6.1, but I note that it says at the end of that phrase, until such time as developer has acquired the property. That's what this all rests on right now. So the question I would have is, how long does he have to make that determination? I think that the only way that's going to get resolved is if it goes to a judge and the judge says 8 years is way past the amount of time that you should have had. So I'm going to declare this null and void. That is my preferred solution because I don't want as a third party in an argument between the owners and Wedgewood. That's the first question.
So I'll direct that to Marcus since it's legally based.
Well, I agree with you that it ultimately is an issue between the owners and Wedgewood, but they have been very clear with me that they have no current contractual arrangement whatsoever with Wedgewood, nor are they intending to sell the property to Wedgewood. They are currently under contract with partners, and I think that 6.1 is clear that Wedgewood has no rights under the agreement until such time as they have acquired the property.
I understand that.
And we did
My
have-
question is, how long does he have to do that? If the day after this agreement was signed, GF showed up and offered to buy the property, could they have done that? If 8 years ago, could GF stepped in front of Wedgewood?
We had our attorney look at this as well, and our concurrence is similar to Marcus in the sense that all that agreement says is that Wedgewood has the right to do development on a land that they don't own yet. The agreement takes effect once they own the land. There is no contract between them and anybody to buy land. So if I walk in tomorrow and I hand them a check and I buy the land, that agreement can still stand as is, right? Let's say we don't transfer it to me. That agreement still stands. Now Wedgewood has to buy the land from me, right? In order for that agreement to take effect. And I will never sell to Wedgewood. So that agreement basically would just so therefore, I can acquire the land because they are under no legal contract to sell. So if I acquire the land, that agreement could stand. You're absolutely right. And Wedgewood could sit there and say, well, I got 7 more years to potentially buy the land.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, yeah, he's got an opportunity to buy the land, and my question is, when does he no longer have that opportunity to buy the land?
If I can speak to that, nowhere in the agreement does an obligation exist of the owners to sell to Wedgewood. So the fact that the owner's saying this will never happen, I believe answers that question. They will not sell to Wedgewood.
Yeah, so basically they're not gonna sell to
They
him,
will
even
not
if there
sell.
was an offer or something like that. So they're just
Correct.
clearly said no.
It's all somewhat of a stalemate because the development agreement does not specifically outline what you're asking for. It does not say, this is the 15-year agreement and you have 8 years to try to buy land. It doesn't say that. It does leave it somewhat open-ended, saying you can do all these wonderful things, assuming you purchase the land, right? So that assumption is kind of wide open. So the thing is to your point is, if we never assigned it and all stay the same, we don't even talk about it, I just go buy the land, he still has some right unless he buys the land from me. And if I don't sell him, then I could start my own development agreement with the city and I could just sit out there forever, right?
So one way to resolve this would be for you to just go buy the land, and that takes him out of it entirely, but you're not gonna do that because you might end up owning a game reserve.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I don't know that he can't go to a judge and say the city and the owners and GF conspired to take away my rights to purchase this property, and I'm in a lawsuit that I have to spend money.
And that's why we want to do, our attorneys looked at it, and their take is that to what I think Mark has said, is that they believe, our attorneys believe, that there is no judge in this country that is going to force the Maroney family that they must sell their land to one human being without a contract.
Then why not go to the judge and say, he's had 8 years, he's no longer taking advantage of that 8 years, we want you to declare his option to purchase this property.
And that was our option two weeks ago, was could the city council void the agreement?
I'm much happier to avoid the agreement than I am to sign.
Well, the timing does become an issue, but
I understand the time, and I've never met a developer who didn't want it done yesterday. And I've met a lot of developers.
Well, and to your point, the timing is less of, and if I to be frank, the timing is less of my concern than it is their concern. They want the property sold, and I understand.
Hmm?
If we voided the agreement 2 weeks ago, and we can get to some general, and to be honest with you, 2 weeks ago, we said we were okay with the agreement being voided. If Ray could look at that agreement with a big red pen and say, here's the 27 sections that need to be modified, and if there was nothing in there that was onerous, I was okay going that path as well. So I'm okay either path, so long as two things can happen, is that we can go down that path and we can begin to do some infrastructure while it's nice, which also suffices to the ownership who wants to sell this thing and not drag it out 5 more months. So whichever way makes sense, we're okay with. It seemed the most expeditious path was what Mark suggested 2 weeks ago.
I would rather see Wedgewood taken out of the agreement, but let's set that aside and go on to other concerns.
Well, before we do that, if we're gonna agree to cancel it.
No, I'm just setting it aside. I've heard all the conversation on this that I need. That doesn't mean I've made up my mind one way or another about the subject. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, let's.
I'd like to make a comment on this subject.
Please.
I think that when somebody's ready to move forward on something, and it's a help to the city, and it's been deemed legally proper, and that we are not going to get in trouble, and we have all the people here, timing is of the essence. These people don't want to wait for us to drag our feet for months and months and maybe draw up a new agreement when they're happy with the one that they have now, as long as they're able to assign it. And I think dragging of the feet in this city has been a big problem. That's my opinion. You do.
If that's addressed to me, I am not dragging my feet.
It wasn't addressed to you, it was addressed in general.
Just in case. I am not dragging my feet, but I want to be careful. There's a lot to this agreement. There's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that's happened in the last 8 years. And until I'm satisfied that I understand all this, I'm not prepared to vote on assigning it or avoiding it for that matter. So, having said that.
I would defer to Marcus on the legality of it and
I think he's already said what the legality was.
the thing is,
I think he was very.
Setting that aside and moving on to another subject. I'm setting that aside. I don't need to talk about that anymore. I'm not convinced, but I don't need to talk about it anymore. There's
don't we have a
other
resolution
concerns.
before us?
Yes, we
Yes,
do.
that's,
Well, let them ask us questions. Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
so I've heard a couple of times that adjustments had to be made, and adjustments will be made, and we'll rewrite the development agreement. I see nothing in this assignment that says you can't go forward with it just as it is once it's done. Other than SIAs, other than SIAs that are going to be particular in impact fees and costs of improvements and other matters related to the development of specific projects. I see nothing that would allow the city to come back and say, wait a minute, we don't like the section, the entire section on the density of development.
What's an SIA?
Subdivision improvement agreement.
In the document, it references a number of times that at certain phases of the project, they would have to come back to the city, and the city would say, okay, this phase of the project, we're gonna need this impact fee, we're gonna need this amount of money to improve facilities, we're gonna need this amount of money to improve roadways, we're gonna need this amount of money, et cetera. That's what happens under a SI.
But isn't that what Ray said, that they're trying to take the ambiguous language out so they can already cover what the roadways would be, or dirt or whatever, or all of those things that he wants, if it was rewritten, they would put the more precise language in there to not have it.
I think what the alderman is saying is that if I understand your concern is if that was to be assigned to me, that I could just say, nope, I'm gonna do exactly that, right?
If this is assigned to you, I see nothing that allows the city
There's nothing that
to go back and say, wait a minute, we don't want 90% development of residential out there because it won't pay its way, as an illustration.
There's still the permitting process that needs to go through that Ray would be involved in and part of.
So you're suggesting that if we have concerns, we can wait for that permitting process to come up and then say, wait a minute, we're not going to give you your permit until this is taken care of.
I think that's exactly what we discussed with Ray, is that he is now part of, and the director of the planning department, he would be involved in bringing this to current standards and codes.
And you would be happy with a stop sign being thrown up at Ray's whim when he feels that something hasn't been met, and so that permit isn't going to be issued?
So I think that's a little bit of the, and I know that doesn't really sit well if you're a developer and you want things buttoned up tight, but I think that's a little bit of the leap of faith that we're talking here, is that we're not willing to buy the land without something from the city. That agreement gives us the baseline to do that, knowing full well that now that I have that, if I want to go do something, I'm still going to have to go through a general permitting process and a bunch of stuff where Ray could say, hey, you didn't want to shake my hand on that agreement, I'm not going to shake your hand on this agreement. So my intention would be going into this with the utmost air of cooperation. We've done what seems to be the simplest thing from the city. You're saying that to us, what is out, I own the land, I have an agreement, they're sold the land. Now, all I'm going to do is sit down with Ray for some really intense conversations for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, however it's long, to start fine tuning those points. And to be honest with you, a lot of that agreement is based upon a development plan that was massive. We have zero interest in doing anything even close to that. We have one plan, one piece of land, about 80 some odd acres. We want to put 250 houses on. That's plan one, that's it. I have no other thought beyond that. So all I'm going to want to do with Ray is say, how do I do that to get my road up there, my utilities up there, and get 250 houses up there to solve a little bit of the housing crisis? Beyond that, I don't know what we're going to put up there. I don't know what the city needs. I don't know what the people are going to need. Do they need more residential? Do they need more commercial? Do they need a hotel? I don't know. We have no other plans at that point. We're not putting a golf course, we're not putting helicopter pads or gondolas. Right? So we're trying to be methodical about it and take a chunk of land and do the right thing. And so that agreement is overarching, but our plan was to take that and know that, you know, we could be adversarial and fight this all the way, or our plan was look, there's 600 people in this town, I think it'd be a great service for the city. How do we work together very, very closely? I live here, I'll be up here all the time. How do we just get that first phase done and accomplished, and then figure out what do we do later?
What the city needs, more than a hotel, more than a golf course, more than a residence, is assurance that the development is going to pay its own way. It's long been a concept that development pays its own way. And I would be a lot happier if this had a whereas or a stipulation and now therefore that the city is assigning this agreement with the understanding that the development will pay its own way.
Well, when you
and
say
if
pay,
that doesn't happen, there is some recourse.
Sure, and that's probably a discussion, but when you say pay its own way, you know, that's always a give and take between a city and a developer, you know? The city's got to do something with the water. Eventually, if I don't buy the land or do anything, eventually you're going to have to do that work at some point in time. So maybe we ramp that up and do a little bit faster. I don't pay 100%, but we figure out a way to work together for that, you know? We need to get some other infrastructure done out there. How do we work collectively to do that? Is that a tax abatement? What do I get in return for putting in, I'm gonna spend $30 million on 80 acres. Double the size of the city. Those are the questions that we need to work on, and I agree with you.
All those questions can be answered, and impact fees, SIAs can address a lot of that, but this development's gonna go on for 50, 100 years, and the city's gonna be on the hook for providing services for that long past the expiration of any revenue that comes for SIAs or impact fees. That's why I'm concerned and why I'm being careful about it.
Understood.
I know it can be done because I was instrumental in an agreement for 6 square miles of land that did exactly that. That the agreement on annexation was that it would pay its own way and we would calculate the costs that the city incurred, and we would calculate the revenue that came off the property, and that worked for 10 years. So I know it can be done.
Yep.
There's a lot of questions I have just about the differences in the agreement, and I'm just going to ask him or the owners instead. The 2011 agreement involves Maroney and Maelstrom, but there's also Scoff and Maravinci listed as owners. In the 2019 agreement, Scoff and Maravinci are no longer involved. What happened?
So those two owners did actually sign an affidavit 2 weeks ago saying that they're not going to sell the land as well. Our plan one is to, since the Maroney family owns the largest chunks, is to get that secured and done. The Scoff land is a little tiny thin strip on that left-hand side, pretty easy to acquire, no big deal. The right-hand side is where Barbish land is. We'll acquire that, at the appropriate time.
So the original agreement lists these owners, and they're still owners of property there, but now we're only going to sign an agreement with Maelstrom Maroney.
The Scoff and the Barbish property are two properties that were not annexed into the city and were not recorded. Therefore, they are not part of that agreement. The intent, I think, years ago was to have it all annexed and recorded. There was a failure at some point, and those two parcels were not recorded, therefore they're not in the city.
That goes to another question I had, because the math wasn't adding up for me. We have a number of things. We have the annexed property, which is 254.925 acres, plus the Bell Lode and the Monitor Lode. We have the property to be annexed, and I assume that's the Scoff property that you're talking about. That's 9.11 acres. And then we have what's described as the property that is 264.069 acres, plus the Forget-Me-Not, Bell, and Monitor Lodes. Then when we look at this new agreement, new resolution, we changed the terms from annexed property to the property. I get lost in all that. So we're no longer talking about the same size property as we were in 2011. Correct?
That's correct. And
This
in
is
the
a smaller
agreement,
portion of it.
the legal description is attached to the assignment, which is just the Maroney property, not the other two properties.
And that is the 254 acres?
It's actually more than that, I believe. I think if you take out the Barbish and the Scoff land combined, it's no more than 20-something, 25 acres combined. That was originally in there. So that puts the Maroney property between 280 to almost 300 acres.
So this new resolution recognizes only the Maroney property, the 254.925 acres, plus the Bell Lode and the Monitor.
Correct. My understanding was the reason why we had to do that is because those other two pieces of property were not annexed back in 2011 like they would. So that agreement was written with the intention that was going to get annexed, and it didn't. So we could go down that path, but now I got another problem. I got to annex first before I create the, right now I'm back in my,
Okay,
my
that
long.
just fills in a gap for me. I just wonder where all all of a
Yeah.
sudden, the numbers got changed.
Yeah.
And why? When this property was annexed, it would not be unusual for there to have been annexation agreements, an assessment of what the impacts of the annexation would be, maybe even conditions that the city requiring the property owners to meet if there are annexations. Do we have those annexation documents? Do we know that there weren't any conditions
I believe,
to annexation that aren't being met here?
I believe there are some related documents that were recorded at that time. There are some irregularities, I think, with respect to some of the taxation and what happened since 2011. But we don't have those in your packet. And
It's my understanding that there was no annexation agreement when the original property was annexed in 1999.
It was going to rely on something like this.
This agreement in 2011, I think, was really intended as an annexation and development agreement with respect to the property owned by SCAF and Marvinci that was ultimately not annexed into the city. So that property is currently located in unincorporated Gilpin County.
Right, okay. So to add on to that previous question about it, the annexation, there was no assessment of the impacts of the annexation, the cost of service, the revenue generated by the properties, nothing like that could help us with this?
not that I'm aware of.
Well, other than this development, the 2011 development agreement is pretty clear that the developer is responsible for paying the costs of extending all infrastructure to the property. And for example, paying costs associated with upgrading the city's water treatment plant. I mean, there are certain obligations that are contemplated in the 2011 agreement. Now, the details, I think, were contemplated to be set forth in the SIAs, I think, as you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That concept is pretty clear.
And I think as far as maybe what your question was going toward was an economic impact analysis or statement, benefits maybe to the city, and not necessarily just the impacts of the costs. And that I'm not aware of being part of that record. But.
And you just touched on another question that I was going to skip to if I could find it. It seems to me there's a conflict between 7 point on page 12 of the annexation agreement, there's the statement that in 7.9, if the developer is required by the city to upgrade any of the existing facilities by the city shall rebate or credit the developer for its costs and expenses. That's contrary to what I just heard. And then on 7.3, it says the opposite. It says what you just said, Marcus, and that is that the developer is going to pay for improvements on-site and off-site. So in two different sections, one section says that the developer is going to pay for on-site and off-site public improvements necessary to serve the project. And in 7.9, it says if they do that, we're going to reimburse them for it. And then it refers to 7.11, I think, reimbursement agreements, and reimbursement agreements only detail if there's another development that happens that makes use of these improvements, then they would have the right to go back and recover some of those costs. So that isn't pertinent to improvements made to city facilities that are off-site. Let me take that a step further. The reimbursement agreement isn't pertinent because it deals with another circumstance. That circumstance being another development comes on that has passed the water line that are installed to handle this development, then this development has the right to recover their costs. So that has nothing to do with making improvements to city facilities and then either absorbing those costs or requiring the city to reimburse
And then the
them.
last sentence there says, the once any connection is made by the developer of the city and the utility lines, the city or the appropriate utility company shall immediately not and automatically become responsible for the maintenance, repairs, costs, and associated with such utility lines.
Mhm. But that doesn't talk about,
That adds
it
another
doesn't,
layer to that.
if we have to increase the capacity of the third tank and the filter plant in order to handle this facility, then 7.9 says they can come back and ask us to reimburse them for those improvements. 7.3 says we don't have to.
Marcus?
Let me take this, make this a little more complicated. In the past 8 years, we've had capital improvement plans, at least one that I'm aware of, that list a pretty significant amount of improvements that are necessary to the water plant. I believe it's a couple $1 million. If we don't make those improvements, and we don't have the money to make those improvements, but we can't serve this project until we make those improvements, what do we do?
And I think that one of the points in there is that a number of things have changed over the period of disagreement as it's existed. And for instance, some of the properties that were previously served that required a lot of water, say like 2 of the casinos that closed down in 2013, some of that from a production standpoint has changed. And I think we would need to reassess what the requirements are now compared to what they may have been back then.
Well, we shouldn't be in the business of banking on vacancies.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the capacity, let's not talk
We,
about.
yeah, we have to look at, I guess, what those needs are today, not what they were before, with respect to capital improvement plans. But yes, I mean, when we talk about production, there are certain improvements that need to be taken into account there, as well as distribution. The other portion that I think is connected somewhat to what Councilmember Mitchell was reading has to deal with other utilities. And so the sanitation district, there are going to be other improvements that will not be part of our system. So, and that we will not accept.
All of that, again, being set aside, do we have the wet water to provide this development?
I think to one of the points you made earlier about projections on impact, 300 homes and what that equates to, I don't believe there's a calculation in the agreement.
250.
380, 250. So yes, that is information that's not contained.
We have seen some studies that came from the city and from some older documents that were written between 2 and 5 years ago. Said something about the water treatment plant is currently at 40 to 60% capacity. You never want to get above 80%, so there is a little bit of a buffer currently today, but with the influx of certain sets of homes, then yes, we'll have to make some improvements there.
Well, it's
Hold on, our water department's shaking back there.
No, I was just kind of thinking different things.
there's a different.
My head was spinning.
Oh,
What I understand the city manager to say is we have the water rights to serve this project?
As I understand it, we would have the water rights. We would have to see if we would have the capacity for production. The other thing is that given its location in relationship to the water plant, there would have to be booster pumps and a booster station, likely a large capacity tank, and all the other things that would go along with that, because the majority, if not all, of our service falls below that point. And there is a separate system or separate part of our system provide services as well as storage to Prospectors Run. But other than that, most of it's gravity gravity fed until you get to the Spring Street booster station that then takes it up towards the apartment complex.
Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, that's correct.
I see you know.
Yeah.
That's a lot of things I don't know about. I'm not going to pretend. So.
But there's a difference between water rights and actual water that you get when you turn on the tap.
Correct. Yes.
And those other improvements necessary would no doubt be covered under an SIA or some other,
Yes.
something that we can't control. Well, we can, but it isn't addressed in this document. We're not only serving water and fire and police and roads and transportation, but we're also responsible for stormwater. There's going to be a lot of impermeable surfaces up there if it's developed as this plan calls for. Let's just go through that list. 390 luxury rooms.
So I can stop you right there, sir. You could scrap everything that you're going to read there.
Okay, then let's just scrap the agreement.
200, I was fine with that 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It's 250
Done.
homes. 250 homes is all we're talking about.
250 homes. I'm assuming that the city council at the time, in 2011, made a calculation that invite this development into our city and be assured that we won't be asking our existing residents to reach into their pocket in additional taxes to pay for that development. And they did that based on there's going to be a hotel, there's going to be other facilities in here that would be revenue generating. 250 houses are not going to generate any revenue except for a minimal amount of property tax. And if you've done your homework, you probably realize that Central City and Gilpin County have the lowest property tax in the entire state overlapping. I mean, it is minuscule. And it's something I'd like to see us address so we can get some services that are desperately needed in this county, but that would mean a property tax on everybody that lives in Central City in order to support this development if there's only houses up there.
In phase one. I mean, so there are plans to do more, but not as aggressive as you may have seen from the previous.
Can you help me? What other
Sure.
what other revenue would be generated by this project?
So if you look at that map, so that down far left, that's where we're looking at putting phase one, okay, which would be that 250 homes, okay? Leading to that from the cemeteries is that kind of thinner strip there, that's about 100 acres or so. That is going to be open for now. We have an idea to put more residential in there, okay, but we're not sure yet. If you look at the next two big sections that kind of start from the cemetery and kind of V off on the left and right sides there, those are two other big chunks between 70, 80 acres each. If you look at the left side for us in the OHV Park, that's where we would consider putting a small mixed-use retail and a small hotel, something that would service the outdoor community, allow people to come up and stay in a non-casino environment, something of a small nature where there may be anywhere from 4 to 6 retail, maybe a little mini grocery store, a couple of restaurants, a brew pub, whatever needs to go in there, so that those 250 to 300 folks have some services that are maybe not via casino, and it would generate some revenue via a hotel. Those are the plans. The other big chunk up to the far right, larger residential, might be something else, we're not sure. Our biggest plan was to do the first section and then work with the city and say, okay, what's the infrastructure? What can we put there that makes sense? What will help the city? What's going to give us a nice return for the amount of extra work we're going to have to do to put in, a hotel, things of that nature. How's that going to be marketed? There's no point, no good for us to put a hotel up there if no one's still coming up here. Non-casino based hotel spend, right? So these are things that we're looking at down the road. We have been approached by other developers that have actually asked about, hey, since you're buying whole, can we buy a chunk from you and develop something of their content? So there's a lot of things in the mix, and I know I'm being somewhat ambiguous, but it's by design in the sense that we don't have some large grandiose $300 million plan and need to solve all the world's problems today. We just know that if we put in some homes, one, it may not raise a ton of tax base because of the property tax, but if you got 7,000 people here getting a paycheck and taking that paycheck somewhere else, maybe some of that money stays here. We put a little bit of retail commercial, it might reinvigorate, maybe some people are staying here. We've looked at mixed use, maybe a multifamily. So we're trying to find that balance. That from a development standpoint, we get a nice return on our investment, but it fits within the community and it makes sense and it's not, highly aggressive. That's going to cause some tension between the city, the local people, and the services.
But there's nothing here that requires you to build any retail.
No, the only reason why we would do retail is, I hate to say it, some of living, but my wife and I have been up here a lot in the last several months. I couldn't find a single place to go eat that wasn't a casino. I'm not a casino, so I'm not doing that.
I would love to see a restaurant.
So a nice restaurant, and I know that there's been other restaurants here. There was the one down the street that actually just closed not so long ago. I don't know the reasons for it, but I'm thinking, if you think of that flat land up there as kind of a nice little pocket of residential that's kind of tucked away, and if we could put in a very small mixed-use retail where there's 1 or 2 restaurants, that may be owned and operated by people that live in this area, and there's 250 families that want to go spend their money there, that might be a good thing and it might be sustainable. That's why we're thinking a slower approach. If I put a hotel up there and we as a destination for outdoor activities and recreation besides just casinos, the opera and other things the city does, that can generate revenue, and that will also support that small retail outlet. We're not looking at a giant Safeway, giant King Soopers, small, the other place that didn't want to take my family to is the grocery store that I saw down there that says pot, liquor, and groceries. So not exactly the place I wanted to take my family either. So thinking of some place up there that make it very family friendly, so that if they wanted to stay up there, bikes, trails, things like that, that's the kind of environment.
I think there's a lot of opportunities up there, but
I know there's a lot. Ray and I sit down with some very intense whiteboarding to figure out a lot of things, which is, again, a leap of faith for us, because if I buy that land, there's a lot of things in there I don't know. I don't know yet, but it does give me some protection that I can still build.
what would help me a great deal with the costs of services is if in this document there was a commitment to create a metropolitan district that would be responsible for the building, maintenance, upkeep of all the infrastructure necessary to serve that development.
You're kind of talking like an HOA idea.
No, I'm talking about a Title 32 metropolitan district, which would have a component in it for fire services where you could not necessarily have to build your own fire department, but you could generate income through property taxes that would support the Central City Fire Department. You can't, through a metro district, provide police services. That's something that we would always be on the hook for. And I assume that the sheriff is going to require a different IGA for the city to service this property. So that's going to be a cost we can't absorb with the metropolitan district. But if there's a commitment for a metropolitan district to cover the entire property, that would solve a lot of my concerns.
Are metro districts levies or mills or?
It's property tax.
It's property tax.
You go with lid, bids, gids, and have some sales tax.
Councilperson Heidel, like 7.5 of the development agreement, I believe, contemplates that.
It does, but it doesn't commit them to it. That's what I'm looking for, is a commitment that those costs should be getting taken care of through a metropolitan district.
So with the metro district that, and we're just talking here, but would that be all Central City or just that?
Just that portion.
And they have to agree to be in it?
Now would be the time, because if you're going to establish a metropolitan district, you do it with the fewest owners of property available. And then all the poor individuals that buy property after that pay the tax.
So in section 7.6, there's a thing that says, subject to conformance with the city's plans, the city shall accept and maintain all such roads and facilities at the expense of the city.
That could be taken care of by a metropolitan district. And that's what I'm asking, is if in this document we can get a commitment to a metropolitan district so we aren't responsible for those things.
then we have to start talking about.
Let's
rates and-
think about that. The city can run out of wet water, but something that's overlooked in development plans for this city regularly is the nature of the geography here. This is a steep little valley. Water runs downhill. There's going to be a lot of impermeable surfaces up there created by this development. How are we going to handle all that additional stormwater without having widened the channel? One answer might be a retention pond, but that's going to be an additional structure that needs to be developed as a part of the SIA. I've raised that only because there are so many little pieces to this puzzle that could be dropped off the table and onto the floor and forgotten about before somebody decides, whoa, we forgot about that and now we're in trouble.
And so you're basically addressing the two paths that we had of concern. Path one is 2 weeks ago, if we dissolved it, then we wanted to then enter into a discussion with the city with every point you're talking about, okay? And that would go for this many months, this many long period of time, in which case they may pull and then we're all done and then they go to option 2, okay? Which doesn't alleviate the city because then the city now has an agreement potentially with option 2 that you gotta start all over again. Our second path was assign it to us knowing full well, now to some degree the burden of risk is now on me. Because if I buy the land and I have assumed that contract knowing full well that I have to renegotiate a bunch of it, I'm on the hook and I own the land now. And now I have to spend my time and money and effort with the city to work through that, right? And we may not be able to come to some agreements, right? Where I say, okay, well, there goes 200 acres because we can't come to an agreement. I'll just sit on it till the world changes. And I'll do the one little piece that we can agree, right? Now the burden is on me. Path 2 is what they want, and we're okay with that burden of risk because we feel pretty confident we can work through these issues. The first path put all the burden more on the owners and the city to wait for this thing to come out, right? For us, either path is fine because it just means I'm saving money the longer this drags out, right? But that's why we wanted to break it up into 4 chunks of land and say, I'm not worried about the big chunks and having to negotiate what am I going to do in that top piece with the city. I want to focus on that little piece. Let's get some development going. Let's get some revenue generated. So then if I have to do something, revenue for myself. Because if you think about it, but that's a key portion. If I can't make revenue in that first 88 acres, I don't have the infrastructure and the money to start doing the rest of the stuff. So if the city does say, hey, let's build a settling pond. Hey, that's a great idea. Well, I made some money now. I can contribute to the city. If I can't start breaking ground in the next 60, 90 days with just some basic infrastructure and start looking at the water, I'm into next year now. So now for me to buy the land and have to pay that mortgage for a whole nother year becomes not really the best situation for me.
I'm not unsympathetic to the problems that developers have.
No, I'm sure
and
you
I do
are.
realize that like all private business, it has risks attached, but the rewards are there as well. And I'm also familiar with a place called Dawson Ridge. You know Dawson Ridge? Dawson Ridge is about 40, 50, 60 square miles of land southwest of Castle Rock, where all the roads were put in, all of the water lines were put in, even street lights were put in, and it's still sitting there and rusting today, 30 years after they did that. I don't want to see that happen here.
And I agree with that. You know, one of our goals here also is, why I want to take a phased approach, is I don't want to ruin the natural beauty that's there. I don't want it to where you drive up to Prospect Run and you look and you see this glowing light show of houses. I want it still to retain some things. Plus, we don't really want to ruin some of the natural beauty. We want to retain a lot of the history and the architecture, you know, the things from the cemeteries. Who knows when we start moving land, what we might find. I'd like to retain that, keep that part of the heritage. So I agree with you 1,000%. We also don't know what the city's going to want to need as services 3 years from now. So that's why we have no plans or ideas of what to do for that upper 100, 200 acres. I know for the bottom section, we might be able to solve an immediate issue, put in some roads that allow for future development, because in order to get to that piece, I have to go through that 100 acres and solve some problems. And it may be good for the city. Maybe I put in the water and it solves the problem, but I may never build for another 5 years after the first 300 homes or 250. So, you know, there's a lot of unknowns, and I agree with you. You're raising every concern. I think that these fine people have heard us talk about for the last 30, 40 days, which is, you know, you can make this a big 300-acre piece of property or a simple single-family home that I'm buying. I'm not buying unless I know the roof is good, the cement, you know, all the basic things are done. And even then, I may look around what's going to be built around me, you know, that might affect my property value. So I 1,000% agree, and that's why our approach has been a little bit more of a tapered approach.
But while you are developing your revenue, the city's on the hook for providing your services.
I believe that's what some of the agreement is to talk about is, you know, and that's what Ray and I talked about before is, how do we work to find a middle ground? Because you're right, there is some things in that agreement that are fuzzy, that are open-ended, that say I'm on the hook, you're on the hook, knowing that that's never gonna fly. And that was written before you were all there, we were all here, you know, whoever wrote that, you know, I don't know what their intent was, so.
There is a mitigating factor in that, as I read the current code, we have impact fees for residential dwelling units of $4,873 per. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
So that would be multiplied by 250 for those first residential developments. That would give us something to operate off of for the time being. But again, that money doesn't stay forever.
Well, and I think also, just for clarification, a number of the impact fees really is not something to be looking at for long-term operations because it's not a recurring revenue source. It would be something more about capital improvements. And so, yes, it could be, but it's not sustainable if we do look at it that way for operations.
If I could just clarify, that impact fee for residential was back in 2011, so it's an index for inflation, so it's somewhere north of $7,000 for residential units.
The impact fee in the code is 2011?
It's, yeah, so the impact fee now for residential units is somewhere north of $7,000.
So what I looked at was our big blue book, the city code, and found that chart. And you're telling me that chart has been updated?
There's an ordinance, and it's actually on the community development website, and if you look at that, you can see what the 2019 fees are for residential.
Okay, so there's significant money that would come in if those impact fees are collected at the time that a permit is issued for the residential development. On page 11, they discuss the secondary access. Any idea where that secondary access is going to go? Is it just going to be one road off of the Bald Mountain Road and one road off of the Columbine Road?
That's a prior developer's idea.
Well, it's in this agreement that we're assigning to you.
Doesn't mean I'm gonna build on it. Just means that it's assigned to me that I can, right?
So we are, that was my question, whether that access was going to route traffic through Nevadaville, which would be a surprise to them, I'm sure. But what you're telling me is it may not be built, so all of the traffic generated by this development will come down Gregory Street, or Eureka Street and Prosser.
So those are additional things to work through, because obviously that's going through Nevadaville. That does go right about to the center of that little sliver of 100 acres is where it drops down, where that little V is. That's where it comes out at. That's not your road, really. I drove that multiple times here just the last couple of weeks. So it's a fine road, but it doesn't really take you. It takes you right to the start of that property. So, you know, we looked at it and said, you know, what is it going to take to develop? Do I improve it? Do I pave it? Do I leave it as is? And if the people that live up there want to take that back road, that's their option, or they come down Gregory. You're right. Those are other things that we need to discuss and say, how's that going to impact the city? What does that make sense? What else do we have to do?
I think a secondary access makes a lot of sense.
I love the idea.
Because
yeah.
one of my concerns has long been, most of the winds run from the west. Forest fire runs from the west. Forest fire encroaches coming from the west on that property. All that evacuation is going to come through Central City at the same time Central City is trying to evacuate. There ain't enough roads to do that.
I mean, that road
So
exists, and it
secondary
goes right to the property, so that's a bonus. It's just a matter of what would need to be done to that road, and who we have to talk to get that permit and make that possible. And what's the time? Do I do it on phase one? Do I do it when I increase the density at a level that requires it? You know, I think the original developer, his original plan and I'm very intimate with his original plan, was to try to put in most of the services and most everything all at once. He wanted to just go gangbusters.
Dawson Ridge.
Yeah, and, you know, one of the problems with that is, you know, to be perfectly frank, the way that we got involved in this, we were originally gonna be one of the investors. So pulling out and looking at this path, that doesn't make sense to develop the whole thing. I don't know, can it support the whole thing? That road would be critical if you suddenly had 900 homes and 600 apartments, and you had a hotel, and you had a spa, and people are helicoptering in. Yeah, you absolutely need more than that one little road that goes up by Prospect. But if all I'm doing for the next 2 years is putting in 250 houses, and then let's see what happens, I may not have to do that right away.
Not right away.
Right, but it'll have to be done, just like if you look from where the cemeteries are, where that road stops at Prospect, and you take the left to get to the property, that's a single road. You know, like any road, I may put in a nice paved 2-lane road, but leave enough left and right, so as I build it up, I could widen that to a 4-lane. But I'm not gonna put in all 4 lanes today, right?
But that road would still funnel you back down Eureka Street and Prosser Street. The only way you're gonna avoid that is if you go up over that road to Bald Mountain and down through Nevada.
Right, because where the land is, you can see on that little thin part, there's that little wishbone looking piece. That's the piece that goes up, and that goes right to the land. So that goes right to the beginning of that property. So it does drop right in. It would just need improvements.
So this requirement for secondary access could require you to build a road over to Nevadaville, and you'd be okay with that?
That's up to negotiation on timing. Do I have to put it in before, or do I have 10 years to put it in?
Right.
Speaking of timing, how long does it take to build 250 homes?
It's actually, the way that we're going to do it, it's actually surprisingly fast to build them and put them on site. We're not going to overnight see 250 houses and then try to sell them. We're taking pre-orders to sell them that way. You know, we've done our math. 6,000-7,000 people here. If I get 1.5% of the people that are casino workers, and maybe the other 1.5% comes from locals, people in the area, various other reasons, there's my 250. We've done studies of similar type of things, and we've seen these types of homes in this type of a market sell out literally in 2 weekends. We take pre-orders, and then the houses will get built off-site and are delivered up. So they're all going to be modular homes, but they're really nice. Yeah, the prefab, they're all very nice, very high-end. Everything from 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. They can be built out, and we can actually put out capacity of one of our builders is 30 homes a month. So.
How much would these houses go for? I'm just.
Sure. So, and
I could just
I'm
talk
glad you
about
asked.
2 weeks. I'm like, oh, okay.
No, I'm glad you asked. You know, so our plans for that
That's
is
interesting.
we've gone down and looked at the affordable housing and looked at HUD and looked at many things, but there's too many constrictions around doing that. So we want them to be affordable without the affordable home stigma. So for a 1-bedroom, we're trying to keep them in that $200,000 range. We're looking at a 2-bedroom to be slightly $250,000, and maybe the 3 bedrooms a little bit more. So we're trying to keep them in that lower end range. That two reasons. I get a good sellout if I'm 100,000 under the average house. I mean, the average house in Gilpin, granted it's a very large area, you know, is going for almost $400,000. If I look in this city here, Prospector's Run's going for $300,000 to $350,000, $375,000, and those are remodeled from 10 years ago. So if I can put something brand new, high quality, that's about $100,000 to $120,000 less, I think our sell rate's going to be good, and it solves itself.
I'm all in your business, but I was just curious.
No, that's fine. The better the questions, you know, I'm happy because I want to instill the confidence that this isn't granted the other developers have been working on this for 10 years. We've been working on this for 3 or 4 months, but we've got experience. We're looking at this, and we're not going through this blindly. Our plan is not to buy this land and sit on it for 10 years. We may not develop the whole thing, but we will develop a chunk.
I'm just about done. So a question for the city attorney. Can we add to this resolution a couple of whereases? That one would obligate the developer to creating a metropolitan district that would build and receive and maintain all of the infrastructure. And 2, a statement that says something to the effect that this assignment is made based on the information that the development that the city's been assured the developer and the development can be self-sustaining, and there will be some kind of recourse for the city should that not be the case? That was really tough, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how you would hold me accountable 5 years from now that the house is that it's, I mean, how I would be accountable for
I can think of one way, and maybe that's through the Metropolitan District, where the Metropolitan District is obligated to fulfill that requirement that should there be a shortfall between the cost of services that the city provides and the revenue developed by the property, the Metropolitan District will make up the difference between those, which of course goes to the poor individuals that are paying that tax, and maybe they wouldn't have a choice on whether that tax gets increased or not. It's all a matter of how the Title 32 is set up. But I think it could be done.
I think we could urge the developer to consider the formation of a Title 32 district. I don't think that we can require it. It's a voluntary petition process. I mean, the owner of the property has to petition to create a district, and I'm not sure that we could require that, but we could strongly suggest that the cities would prefer the formation of a metropolitan district over a alternative like a homeowners association.
Well, as I said, the best way to form a metropolitan district is when there are few owners. So you create a director's parcel. You find 4 friends, they create a director's parcel for those 5 people, vote a district, and they set the service plan, they set the revenues, they set the debt limits, they set all of those requirements. And since we have the future owner sitting here, I think that we could put in a whereas that requires that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would agree with Marcus. I don't know that I'm comfortable putting in that it's a mandate that I have to do that. I wouldn't object to having to look at it as an option, you know, to try to give some protection against the city. Much the same way as I would like 2 other things added if we're going to add whereases is, you know, there's only 8 years left in that agreement. If I get it reassigned to me, I want assurances that I can start that clock over, that I got 15 more years once we start even. I also want to be able to reassign that agreement if I were to sell 80 acres to somebody else and reassign that to them as, if you will, a sub-developer. It allows me to reassign it as to another owner, but I'm still going to own the land. I want to be able to reassign as well.
I don't know if those 2 things could be accommodated.
No, I don't think so either.
The reassignment, I think, would have to have the city's approval, that you could do it would be, I don't see any objection to that.
Right, and the 15 years is something, obviously, if we're to look at developing this out, if we didn't extend that, only having 7 more years may not be enough time to do all the things that need to be done. You know, looking at a metropolitan, you know, I understand the point of that is to ensure that the city's not then overly burdensome with that and ensure that we're putting the right things, which is down the path that we're going down anyway, is not to put a bunch of things in there and then walk away and go, great, I made my money, good luck, city. You know, the whole point is to put things in and do it at a pace that the city can absorb. So I'm not opposed to that. You know, the only thing that would be opposed to that is, what does it take? What's the fees? How much money am I going to spend to set that up to ensure the city? And what am I going to get in return for paying on, you know, 10 more years of taxes on land that I'm not doing it?
It used to cost about $30,000 to establish a metropolitan district. That's probably changed. Yeah. Attorneys charge a lot more. I think that's a reasonable quid pro quo that the city would consider adding more time to the vested rights and in return for a commitment to the metropolitan district.
You know,
but we're negotiating now. That's not the.
Right. But we can discuss and, you know, negotiate that. I mean, I would need to see more about what that would entail, what that causes us to do. Is that something that we can do, you know, in parallel, do later? You know, like you said, it's easy to do with owners. If I buy the land, then there's only one owner. It's easy to do.
I'd love to just shake your hand and call it a good deal, but there's a lot of foundations down that gulch that people said were going to be good that never got done. So pardon me if I'm skeptical, and I'd like to see it right. Mr. Mayor, I think I'm done for the time being.
Okay. So there any other questions right now? Are Ray, Daniel, and Marcus saying, go ahead and assign and we'll work these things out? What do you guys, what's your recommendation? I'm gonna say the same thing I said at the beginning. It's all, I've never even heard of a Title 32 Metro District, so excuse my unfamiliarity. But there's just so many things in here that have been pointed out. I'll go ahead and, there's a vote now if that's what we want to go through, and if you guys recommend we do, I would probably, well, I'll save my vote for my vote, but, and I understand property owners wanting to move forward with the sale, and I understand the developer wanting to get some shovels in the ground as soon as possible. It's way too necessary. I would rather we start from the beginning. I think that if you get to know us, you'll know that we are partners sitting behind this table here. I think we will get this done. I think it's a beautiful project. I love the idea of doubling the population of, but I don't think everyone can go down there. I don't think that that's viable. So I do think we need a second access, and I think all this could be spelled out, and so that's where I'm at. This assignment makes me nervous. Do you guys have a recommendation?
I think the only thing I can say is that there, in the CCF, there is a recommended action. I think one of the things is it's obvious there are a lot of questions and a number of issues that probably still need to be worked out. And so I think if council has the ability to continue, to table, approve, reject. So, I mean, I don't want to color the decision for council, but I think just based on what's happened tonight, there are a number of questions, and maybe there are some suggestions from some of those involved, and I think Ray's standing up as well.
So the only thing I would echo what Daniel said, and let council know that we have this established agreement and we'll just be transferring as to who that developer is. Yes, it was done many years ago. It wouldn't look exactly as it is before you tonight, but staff and the city has not even started any discussions of negotiating the new agreement. But once it is assigned, that will be the next course of action. But just to remind council that we do have this existing development agreement in place that the city is committed to, but we do have a developer here that's prepared to negotiate an agreement. It sounds like council will be more receptive to.
So the new agreement would not have the language, the city shall accept, maintain all such roads and facilities at the expense of the city.
I have been taking notes, and I had the idea of Metro District.
And that's my fear is that,
It's on recording.
And I don't know if Gary and Tommy want to chime in on, like, if we have 250 homes up there, how much more police are we going to need? And are you going to have to expand? Do we have enough firemen and response time and things like that?
Title 32 Fire District.
So it sounds to me that we should table this.
So I'll just say one last thing. So it sounds, what I'm hearing you say, what I hear Marcus say, and I hear the owner, it seems to me the way that I'm viewing this is that we're all kind of in violent agreement to the same thing, which is whether or not you void the agreement. So if we voided the agreement and I have to start from scratch, that's putting the risk in the city. Right? And I'm okay with that because then I have no risk. I can drag that out for 8 months. I don't care. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't want to drag it out for 6, 8 months until I get to next season when I can build. Because I don't want to do any of that during the off season. Okay? So that puts the risk all over there, and that's not what they want. And so if we were to play that out, they may say, you know what, the heck with Phil, you're out. They're going to go with the secondary developer if they're real and they true. And the city is now going to be obliged to that agreement, and you're going to be right back in the same spot where you're going to be negotiating that agreement. Okay? The second path is you assign that agreement to me, knowing full well that I have to renegotiate the agreement. Right? They're happy they got the land, and now the city and me as a developer are working through that plan. And I may be more
apt to make agreements, because now I own the land, I'm paying for it. So if we're kind of stuck in a quandary, I may want to push it. If we're in steps one, I have no desire to I drag it out till the cows come home, because I don't have any vested interest yet. So I think the way I'm seeing it, whether it's me or it's the other developer or what, that agreement's going to have to be completely reworked. And so the way that the risk on me, let me buy the land, the risk is on me to negotiate that agreement with the city. Okay? And we could do that expeditiously, because I want to try to get some things going up there this year, and the owners get the property sold. If we go the other path and we table it, and you say, let's think about starting from scratch, again, I'm okay with that. But that then may mean that it gets dragged out, which means I may back out, and then they got to go with secondary buyers, which is fine. And then secondary buyers, then we'll be negotiating with you on that agreement, and they may be less apt to want to do it, because, to your point, there's nothing that makes them have to renegotiate with the city except for the permitting process. So that's my take, is I can go either way. One would benefit the city more, put the risk on me. One benefits me and just drags it out.
Well, I got a slightly different way.
Okay.
And that is I'm not opposed to adopting a resolution that would assign the agreement, but a condition that I would want to see, or 3 conditions that I just mentioned. I just added another one.
I'm going to get done because you'll be adding more. So.
Right. Well, I think this last one will take care of. I'd like to see in the resolution that we adopt a commitment to a metro district, a statement that the city is assigning this agreement on with the understanding that it will pay its own way, that there will be sufficient revenue generated by the property to offset the costs. And the third one that I just added right now is just what you said, that we're going to renegotiate and the densities in the hotel and residences.
I have a question to Marcus. If we sign this agreement, is there anything in here that we're legally obligated to consent to? I mean, are we under any legal obligations if we sign this agreement with the wording stuff? Like I said, the city shall accept and maintain all roads at the expense of the city. Or if we sign this, are we obligated, legally obligated to any of the wording in this agreement?
Well, the city has signed the agreement. The 2011 development agreement exists. That language is not uncommon. The way most development, residential development occurs, unless there's an express agreement that the roads will be private, is that the developer builds the roads at the developer's cost and expense. Those roads are typically warranted for 2 years. Some jurisdictions are 1 year. At the end of that probationary acceptance period, the city will accept those roads as a public right-of-way and thereafter be responsible to maintain them as such. So the assignment and assumption agreement is an agreement that these parties have negotiated. The request tonight is for the city to consent to that assignment, because the city's consent is required by the 2011 development agreement. It does say that the consent cannot be unreasonably withheld. I think that you have raised some questions tonight that you need additional information on. But again, the request is for this agreement to be assigned to this new entity if they close on the property, right? If they fail to close by the property on or before May 20th, then this assignment and assumption agreement and the city's consent is automatically revoked, right? This assignment and assumption agreement will not be recorded unless and until these parties close the transaction that they're contemplating. I think it's very, I think it obviously differs from the vision that the owner and the developer had in 2011. And this agreement will have to be amended. But that obligation for the city to maintain the roads, I think that was contemplated in
And
2011
agreement
because that's
was-
most.
That agreement was largely based on the, there has been a lot of retail, a lot of business growth.
Correct.
Yeah. So that would have offset the part that we maintained.
So one of the amendments to the agreement that might be contemplated would go to establishing these rights of way for this residential subdivision as private.
Can we amend this
Right,
agreement?
or putting the maintenance obligation, the long-term maintenance obligation on a metropolitan district or a financing district that will maintain that right of way. We cannot amend this agreement tonight because there are specific notice provisions that we have to adhere to if we're going to amend the agreement. The only thing before you tonight is do you want to consent? Do you want to give your advance consent to allowing the owner of the property to assign their obligations under this agreement to the entity that is under contract to acquire the property?
But I'm assuming your office wrote Resolution 1907.
Yes.
So we can change 1907. And what I'm suggesting is that I could support requiring a metropolitan district. It makes a statement that the understanding of the city is that the property will provide sufficient revenue to be sustaining, and that we will rewrite the development agreement. Those three things, whereas in 1907.
If the developer were.
Well, let me give you an answer from the attorney before the point's up. Can this be rewritten that way?
We whereas clauses to a resolution if there's a motion to amend the resolution and it's seconded and all of you are in favor of doing that. But again, I don't think that we can legally require the owner to form a metropolitan district. We can negotiate that as part of the amended development agreement. But I'm hesitant to say that we can impose that condition tonight and obligate somebody to voluntarily create.
One more question, Mr. Mayor, and that is, I think that if you come back with a rewritten resolution that addresses those 3 points, then that will give the city something to look at approving that would assign the rights. And assuming that it's written much as I outlined, I'd be ready to sign that assignment. I'm sorry, I stepped on your toes.
No, sorry, step on it. All this conversation just leads to more questions, but like Marcus just said, do we as a council want to move forward with the reassignment, knowing full well that there's going to be renegotiated almost every aspect of what's being assigned?
Yes.
Are they legally obligated to renegotiate? That's a question I have.
Yes.
To amend the agreement, or the agreement, if we approve the reassignment?
I think if they want to change the plans for the development from anything other than what was contemplated, which it sounds like that would be the case, then it seems like it would be imminent, but not required if tomorrow, but Phil says, you know what, I want to carry out what was in there. I mean, that's possible. He's got to do it in 7 years, but.
But the agreement says, the existing agreement says it doesn't have to be built out that way. So
The current agreement says there's no obligation to develop the property at all, period.
Much less with a hotel and the rest of it.
Correct, there's no obligation to develop on any specific time frame.
So a resolution that addresses metro districts, a resolution that adds a whereas for renegotiating the development agreement, and one that the city the development, the property to pay its own way.
If the developer wanted to opt into a Title 32 Metro District right now, who then, do we as council set those rates? Are they based on cost metrics? What sets those rates out?
That's not even the conversation.
Wow.
It's not even the conversation.
It is if we're asking for what we're asking.
Well, but Marcus already said that we may not even be legally to say that.
If this were an annexation, I think, right?
We can't tell
negotiate
someone,
something similar.
you're buying land, not
That's
from
not-
us, and you're going to have to do what the city wants you to do, this, and this. They're not buying the land.
And we would not be open to a resolution that says that I must do that. I'm open if you say developer and city will research and look at the option and look at what's best. I'm totally open to that. You know, again, being forthright, our plan is not to develop and leave the city in a worse situation, right? Because then I can't develop the land more and make money and do things that we want to do. All along was to either dissolve it and get into a conversation with the city and go, what can we do that's good? If the path is to take this and do that, I'm okay to look at a metropolitan district if it makes sense, but I can't, like you said, it's $30,000. What if it's $3 million? That doesn't make any sense to me. I would not be open to the resolution if it said, I think one of your points was that we will guarantee that that area will maintain it. How do I know? You know, how would we know that it will maintain those services? We haven't done an impact to see what it would cost for increased fire, schools. I don't know yet. So there is all those things that are open that means I'm not going to build unless we're all in agreement. So I think, again, going back full circle, is all that assignment does, that what Marcus has put together, resolution, it just says you're giving the right for it to be assigned if I actually buy the land. And if I buy the land, I still can't do anything with it because I have to go through the whole renegotiation process of that entire agreement. And now the burden's on me. If that takes 9 months, they're happy because they got the money and they're gone. And now it's up to me to spend 9 months to figure that out. Right? If we have to do it ahead of time before, that's not going to be good for the owners because I'm not buying the land until I get to a level of comfort with that.
A whereas is not a now therefore, but it does document the city's concerns and intent. So,
Say that again?
a whereas is not a now therefore. When you read a resolution, you go through whereas, it's to establish the purpose of the resolution and the background of the resolution, and that's what I'm suggesting is that a whereas be added for those three things. And then you get to the now therefore. The now therefore is now therefore. So the now therefore would be the city assigns the rights.
So we're putting on.
Maybe am I close enough?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're saying to the parties is we want on the record that we also would like these considerations.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's on the record, it's been said about 4 dozen times. I think that but he understands what our concerns are. Jeff, do you have any comments? We usually kind of go right to left or left to right. So I think it's a lot of information. I guess I'll start with me. It's a lot of information. Some of these things are new, and and thank you for speaking. A lot of Jack's concerns. I think that you tried to address the best that you could, and you are worried about is that we're going to back out, and then. So I understand that too. I mean, as the agreement stands, it looks like we're responsible for maintenance anyway.
Well,
that's what's already signed in the agreement.
But that would be in any development. I mean, any development we do, we maintain it for a certain period of time, and then it becomes a public road.
Well, one thing, just for clarification, just to kind of go back to what Councilmember Aiken said earlier. When that was negotiated, granted none of us were here, but it has to be assumed that some of the give and take exists on those pages because of maybe what was contemplated. And so if the overall project looks a lot different, the anticipated revenues, et cetera, then that is something that should be taken into consideration in a good faith negotiation.
Yeah, and that's my concern, and then just kind of like the infrastructure in the roads and everyone going down to Rica. I think that's my concern is like, if that's the only right way, I mean, right now, I mean, that's still, even if each person has 250 houses have 250 cars, that's a lot of cars. You know, so coming down that road. So I think that's where my mind, you know what I mean? So I think that's where my mind is mostly at. But I do appreciate you explaining and re-explaining and trying to further simplify. And it does make sense. If we're just talking about reassignment.
Thank you, Councilor. Mr. Mayor, if I may, I think going back to what Councilperson Heidel stated, I think that what he is wanting in a recital, in a whereas clause in the resolution, is contemplating consenting to this assignment with the understanding that GFP will be coming forward with an amended development agreement within a relatively short period of time to reflect the development plan that we'll call it the new development plan that they have envisioned for the property. And whereas, as part of that amended development agreement, the city would like to see the formation of a 32 metropolitan district that can assist with the long-term maintenance obligations associated with public improvements connected with the new development. And whereas the city also wants assurances in the new development agreement that the on-site and off-site infrastructure impacts and other impacts associated with development will be adequately addressed. I mean, I think that is probably what Councilperson Heidel is saying, is that the city is given with the understanding that this agreement will be renegotiated to reflect some of the statements that we've heard from the entity that's under contract to acquire the property. And Councilperson Heidel, if I misstated that in any way, please feel free to correct me.
No, I think that you understand what I'm trying to communicate. I would like a little more specificity about metro districts and ability to pay for its own way and the renegotiation. Maybe we can put that all under one whereas that says this agreement will be renegotiated within some months after the purchase of the property.
The developer has expressed issues with pay's way, and I have some issues with it as well.
You can't look into a crystal ball.
Yeah, he builds 250 homes, and the economy goes to hell.
If we are going to renegotiate the agreement in an SIA, well, you can. We're also taking it for all of those people too. Yeah. If we're going to be renegotiating the agreement and we're going to rely on SIAs to take care of that, then fine. That should cover it.
So how would the
But I'd still like to see.
So, do you want to try to draft a whereas real quick? Here?
Well, why don't we just, we don't need to do this tonight. Okay. Why don't we let the pot simmer for a while? Put the thinking together and get it done next time. And if we need a special meeting, we'll do a special meeting.
I would like to say one thing. I've watched the city and been to many city council meetings and done a lot of reading. And we haven't had, in fact, even count them on one finger, the number of developers we've had come to this area and want to improve it and want to get going on something. And I think that we should be here as a city council to encourage you and help you. And I think a resolution to reassign is simple enough with an attachment to renegotiate the agreement. And I think we wasted a lot of time and a lot of your time. In fact, 2 weeks, where you came in thinking that you wouldn't be scrapping the deal, and we came up with a resolution. Now I think we should act on it.
I don't think anyone looks at this as a waste of anyone's time. We're talking about doubling the population size of our city. It's worthy of a lot of time. So, and we've spent very little time. I'm not discounting what you guys have done for the last 4 months, and of course the owners for multiple years. So
We got 3 weeks until the next meeting, so this time for a special meeting, if you want to do it.
Headache. Okay, so do we have any motion?
Table the resolution
Do we have a second?
until the city attorney can draft a resolution with recitals that address the concerns, the 3 concerns that have been raised.
Do we have a second?
I'm second.
So I have a quick question about that, Mayor. Then if I understand what's happening, then if you're gonna table this, you're gonna ask Marcus to rewrite this and re-present it at the next council meeting, right? Which is 2 to 3 weeks.
Meeting.
Okay. Again, my only concern with timing of that is I'm under contract on a certain date, and I'm okay moving that date, but then I gotta ask them to move that date.
What's that date? May?
We want to close on May 10th was our original idea. We asked for longer, but we negotiated May 10th. My concern is if this goes back and we don't have, I guess my question is if this is rewritten with an extra sentence or 2 in there, is everyone going to say, yep, when we go, or are we going to get back and say, hey, let's look at this again and we have more questions and push it out? Because I'd rather, let's hash all those questions out and come back. Because I agree with you, Mayor. You said there's a lot here. I get it.
And we just heard about it 2 weeks ago, so. It is what
No,
it
I
is.
don't understand.
We have a motion and a second to table this for a special meeting. And I think we will do our best. We can't guarantee you that we will honor that May 10th date, but we will do our best to get there.
We got a special meeting, we want to give them a
There should be a
date.
Well, we don't have to. We need to do what we need to do, irrespective of what they want. So, we have a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All opposed?
Nay?
Well, doesn't matter.
Councilperson Mitchell, is that a no vote?
That's a move.
It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
I think for the record, though, we do need either a yea or a nay.
The table. I vote for the table.
So the motion carries 4-1. The motion has, or the motion has been tabled. Thank you all very much for your time and response.
So let's have him set a special meeting.
Mr. Mayor, Council. Whether council can go ahead and discuss setting the next meeting, since the previous vote was simply to table the resolution. There was discussion about having an amended version of the resolution that comes back, and so if we can get that, or at least direction by motion.
Is there a motion to direct city attorney and city manager to amend the language there?
I think we're looking for direction on.
Okay. We can meet on the 23rd or the 30th and be consistent with Tuesdays. I'm available for either of those. The 23rd would work for me. Depends on how fast Marcus can add 2 wherever, or 3, or 1.
The 23rd probably works better for me.
That's next Tuesday.
Yes, it is. So that's, wait, okay. Motion to.
I make a motion that we have a special meeting on April 23rd, so with 6 o'clock. So we can have our whereases addressed and the resolution to be amended or edited.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Carries unanimously. Okay, we'll see you guys next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Thank you all again. Item 8, resolution number 1908, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado approving engineering-related professional services agreement with Miller Engineers, Inc., doing business as Sounder Miller and Associates. Mr. Hoover.
Mr. Mayor, Council, Resolution 1908 approves of professional service consulting services with Miller Engineers Incorporated. The primary objective of this resolution is to assist the city with an update to the stormwater master plan. That master plan was created in December of 2014. The update will include a reprioritized project list for capital improvements. This is an on-call engineering services not to exceed $, and the work is to be charged by the hour.
Won't surprise you if I say I have a couple questions.
Shocking.
I read the agreement. I've got a couple of questions about the consultant. How long have they been in this?
I can't tell you that. I can't answer that.
I'd also like to know what other municipalities they do work for.
I really don't have that information, Jack.
And the last would be very difficult for anyone to come up with, and that's whether they've ever been involved in a lawsuit dealing with wrongful acts or faulty products. So I'm sure we don't have the answer to that. That's all I've got.
How do you feel about these people?
I've met with Heather from this firm, and we've had some discussions. I have no reason to believe that they have a poor background or history. I can't really say who recommended them. I currently have a similar contract with JVA, and they provide all the services for the city. So that this would not take the place of that. This is just mainly to deal with environmental issues, such as the stormwater master plan, trying to update that. I did sit with Heather for quite some time. They did come out and do a survey of the city, and they kind of understand what we're up against, what our needs are, our current needs are, and what our situation is up here. So I'm very comfortable with the engineering group. I apologize that I don't know more about them, that I don't really have their background. But I have met with them and do feel that we'd be getting our money's worth out of this firm.
Mr. Mayor, council members, a couple different things. One is Marcus just pulled up some information. So looks like 1984, merger in 1992. Working with clients in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. And And the only thing I was going to offer is I haven't necessarily, I've never worked with the individuals that Sam has met with, and I have met with them, to be clear. So, but I have worked with Sauter Miller and Associates in New Mexico. I want to make it clear I did not solicit, nor was I involved in any way that way. They did come to us after a municipal, Colorado Municipal League meeting, probably, I don't know, 2 years ago. Our discussion with this group, I think, was identified as something that could be similar to what we have with W2 engineers, which is wheel rats. And so when we have water projects, the idea behind the task orders are if, and I think we made this clear through some of those discussions, we can move forward with certain parts of design and or construction to the extent that you know, these contractors or any of these engineers can be successful with acquiring or helping us to acquire grants or grant loan combinations like with W2 engineers. So although that's not necessarily a requirement, that was the goal. But I just wanted to say, just for the record, I have worked with them, but I have not worked with these individuals or this office.
That helps, thank you.
Yeah, you feel good about them then.
I feel good about the services that were provided with the last municipality I worked with in New Mexico, and didn't use Sauter Miller and Associates exclusively, but and that was on the water side, not necessarily a storm water. Never had any issues.
Okay, thank you.
I would move to approve. Oh, do you need more discussion? I would move to approve resolution number 1908, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado approving engineering-related professional service agreement with Miller Engineers Incorporated, DBA Sauter Miller and Associates.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously. Action item number 9, resolution 1909. The resolution of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado memorializing that the installation of new or replacement sidewalks in a natural gray concrete with a room finish within the downtown commercial core will be consistent with the 2017 Central City Design Guidelines. Yeah.
Sorry to see that Lisa has left. I did want to take a moment and thank her for expressing her views on the concrete, and we certainly need to hear those as a public entity, so thank you, Lisa. This really isn't something that I don't sit around and come up with these resolutions and these ideas to bring to City Council. So this is something that was brought up back in March. At the March 12th meeting. And it was actually brought up as a safety concern. And as I recall, the point that some of the issues that we may have been experiencing with the gray concrete curb and gutter, and then the stamped boardwalk colored concrete, is that colored concrete may be perceived at least to be slicker than just a standard gray concrete would be. So that, as I recall, that was probably the biggest reason that I took off and investigated this issue. I'll give you a little bit of background. I started researching the design guidelines, and that's amendment. There was an amendment to Chapter 4, Streetscape, Commercial Area Sidewalks, replace Guideline 3, repeal Guideline 4, of the Central City, Colorado Design Guidelines. And part of that guideline established concrete shall be stamped with a 12-inch weathered wood interlocking plank known as a Pacific boardwalk. Concrete shall be colored as to provide the appearance of a wooden boardwalk. The following technical specifications for color and finishing are as follows. The color is a pecan tan, 855 lithogram, which you can match those colors up from when this guideline was originally developed. And they're hard to match from season to season to keep that same color. It seems as though the manufacturers changed the colors quite a bit. And these sidewalks were to be used. There are some price considerations. Prices for color usually range from about 11 to 20% more per square foot. Of course, that's based on quantities and other considerations. Colored concrete for the Spring Street project adds about 11% per square foot to the cost of the concrete. The stamping, prices for stamped concrete increase the cost per square foot 12 to 20%. So kind of in summary, the Denver area average price per square foot of plain concrete is $3.50 up to $5.50. Adding one color and one simple stamp design raises that cost up to $8 to $12 per square foot. So there are some price considerations. My recommendation would be to do away with the stamped and colored concrete. We're essentially done with the core city. We do have Spring Street left. If we wanted to stop this year, that would probably be a good stopping spot because you can't really see the rest of the sidewalks in the downtown corridor. The other alternative to address maybe the slippery surface would be go ahead and continue the gray concrete and curb and put the reddish or the dark tan or the pecan color in the center and put a broom finish on it and do away with the stamping. One of the reasons that I would recommend going with the total gray concrete curb and gutter, everything gray, is you can really increase your production when you go that way and you get the most bang for your dollar. With that being said, my recommendation is go with gray concrete and curb and gutter.
Broom finish.
And the broom finish.
Yeah, we're just talking about mainly going up by the Big T and then in front of the T-Road buildings. Would that be?
Yes.
And I don't think that would disenhance anything in the city. So I'd be all in favor of the curb and gutter that you were talking about, saving some money at this point. Although I don't have a problem with the sidewalks. I find if they're maintained and cleared properly, they're not that bad. Yeah, let's go ahead with that.
I raised the issue, and I think I was premature when I did it. As I understand it, because we've adopted new design guidelines, these guidelines are no longer in effect.
That's true.
So right now, we don't have any standard for sidewalks.
That's true.
I think the sidewalks are a part of a larger streetscape design that should be addressed. I think we need a streetscape design plan for sidewalks, for street furniture, for bollards, for light posts, for planters, for trash cans, all those things that go into a streetscape design to provide uniformity through the city. So I would recommend that we not address the resolution, and if we have to address it, I will make a motion for the purposes of defeating the resolution, so that we can ask the city manager to embark on streetscape design guidelines that would involve the HPC and the planning commission in their development. And before you panic, I understand that there is a Spring Street project underway and you need approval on that. And I think we can address that specific project right now while we're still doing streetscape for an overall view of what at least the downtown looks like. I'm sensitive to Ms. Laban's concern about the dyed walk, and I can remember that Eureka and Lawrence were, for the most part, flagstone, red flagstone, and that dyed concrete was to be compatible with that flagstone. And I think that's still a good idea to keep it. So I'm looking at mitigating some of the cost by getting rid of the stamped. And I think that does create a slick surface because you have to pull it up tight in order to then put the forms in it. So it creates a slick surface necessarily. But do the colored flagstone appearing sidewalks on this next project and look at the streetscape design for the rest.
My only comment is I do need an answer. Our contractor will be back mid-May to the end of May. And the first thing he will start doing is replacing sidewalk. So I will need an answer soon. Secondly, the only other push, and I don't care, I have no personal stake in this whatsoever, but the only other reason it would make sense to just go gray concrete is that increased production. Because if you go with the colored sidewalk, even though it's not stamped, it still delays production and it will still increase cost.
And I think, Mr. Mayor, council members, just as kind of a general overview, this, as Sam mentioned earlier, this was an issue that was brought up previously. Sam did the research, tried to provide, as objective of facts as he could, and that's what's before you now. And so I think, as you go through this process, we're hearing a couple different things, but as we listen more, maybe we'll have an idea.
So no, I don't like the gray, but it is cheaper. I'll put it in there. The design guidelines and the same working with HPC since I served on HPC, and I mean, it's not in there, and saying that HPC needs to meet and advise, because I mean, HP doesn't advise on any projects, including our own. We don't advise. We even say that in the meeting, we do not advise on projects and design. And so that was my first thing, was like, that's not what HPC does. It does not advise on projects. So I don't know if we should be spending money on figuring out what would be historically accurate for trash cans. They probably didn't have trash cans lining the roads with probably some barrel of some kind. So I don't know if we should be spending money on figuring out what kind of benches it should look like, cast iron with what kind of wood, and what the dumpster would look like in 1863. I don't know if we should spend time or money into that.
Well, I think what Sam wanted, I would say.
But I understand it's talking about productivity. I mean, yeah, you can put it down quicker and get it done and dried, and people walk on it probably half as fast.
Yes, you get more bang. You're going to get more bang for your buck. That's essentially. So, like I say, I have no real personal stake in it. I'm happy to do whatever direction I get. So.
I'd like to just go ahead along the big T,
Me too.
Just the gray, and I don't see what that means to be colored necessarily, and, At least that part of the sidewalk, just get it done, and save us some money.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be holding you up.
With respect to this this resolution, I think what we're trying to establish here is that we don't currently have a standard. This resolution, for the time being, would set that standard. Obviously, that doesn't mean that it can't be changed again in the future. So I think we're really going to be looking for direction as to what the vote of the council is on this particular resolution.
This resolution to me doesn't look like it's setting the standards, it's broadening the lack of standard. Right? Saying,
We don't have a standard right now.
yeah, it's just saying we have even less standards. I personally don't like faux finishes, and I like natural products in their natural form and or color. But I don't, if we now say gray and we're not gonna, consistency is important to me, and I think it should be to the city. So whatever that, I don't think we should be placing it amongst the stamped red, plain gray. That's pretty obvious. So.
I think our concerns with the several people that were stopped means like, you should go, you need to go red. It was just about, we're known for that red color and we're gonna go to something conventional that is taking away our uniqueness. Like, I think that's what most people's concern was, is, you know, and yeah, we have to, you know, figure out where we can cut costs, but the red, I mean, is it gonna be patchwork quilt all down the, you know, sidewalk?
No.
Well, we're just talking about the big T there.
Well, and that's why I wanted to clarify.
It was.
The title of the resolution, you know, granted, yes, we do not have a standard, but in the title here, we're memorializing that what we would do for new or replacement would be the natural gray and the grooved finish. I'm just saying that that's what it says. If you want this to be amended, then I think we would need to do that before it's adopted.
Again, I don't want to see the natural gray amongst the red. I mean, the consistency is what we need to have. So why don't we just memorialize that Eureka and Lawrence, for those 4 blocks, will maintain red and everything else can be gray.
I second that idea.
I don't think we need to adopt a standard.
Okay, but then let's throw it out.
I think to forget about the resolution, address the immediate issue of Spring Street, and that goes all the way down to Gregory Street, right?
Correct. Both
So
sides
let's
of the
just
street.
address that immediate issue, and I'll leave it to the rest of the council to decide whether it's gray or red.
So we
So
need
if
a
we approve
motion
this-
to table the resolution number 19.
No, I think we don't wanna, if the only way we can get rid of the resolution is to remove it from the agenda, let's remove it from the agenda. But if we can just ignore it, not act on it, and it dies, that's fine.
Marcus, can
Well,
we get?
does that give Sam some, does that tell him what to do?
Then we'll have to tell him what to do on Spring Street.
By motion.
Let's get rid
You
of
can have more than one motion.
Direction by motion for Spring Street, which does, I think, not all the way, it is all the way down to Gregory, but I think as Sam was adding both sides, just to make that very clear.
Right.
So that we don't have somebody come back and talk about the Scarlet side. We can do that and we can table this motion, or excuse me, table this resolution.
How soon are they gonna get started on that?
I talked to one of the owners yesterday, and they'd like to start that last week of May. So it'd be nice if I could give them some information a week or two before they started the project, so, you know, they don't run out and buy stamps to stamp it and plan on the colored concrete or whatever the direction.
What color is the east side of Scarlet?
It's
Right.
currently a colored.
Yeah.
It doesn't really match the reds we've been putting in,
But there's some pigment.
but it is
on
colored.
brown on Gregory. I mean, there is somewhat of a mismatch, and I think one of the other things we've talked about is, in some cases, there aren't any sidewalk in this area at all.
Yeah.
Or historically, maybe there wasn't, or it was wooden, or it was flagstone. So I think in this case, it's gonna be very different than it has been in some of the other areas, because so much of it's new.
But no, east and west side of the street are to be replaced as of last week of May.
We not.
Yes.
Yes.
That's at the end of the summer, yes.
Behind Scarlett's? Right behind
Yes.
Scarlett's? It's already got.
Yes, but we're gonna have to narrow that sidewalk a little bit to get a wide enough sidewalk on the other side. So if you go behind Scarlett's right now, that sidewalk is extremely wide, and we wanna take some of that away and add to the other side, so we actually have a sidewalk that's usable on both sides of the street.
So we're ripping up all that sidewalk that was just put down, like, brand new. And still, it's good. Right behind Scarlett's.
Well,
Sounds like it.
Okay.
and I think that there's going.
Let's just table this and come
I
back.
haven't got enough time for that, so I'll move that the Spring Street sidewalk, the sidewalks involved in the Spring Street project be installed with red pigment and a broom finish.
On both sides?
The project.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
I don't want red.
Okay, then say no.
I don't agree with red. Nobody sees it up there, nobody from downtown walks up Spring Street. It's more expensive, time consuming. And isn't it true that the stained concrete, they only come around intermittently, like once a month or once every 2 weeks? Or once a week to do that fill-in of the curbs?
I think what's happened in the past is we've always poured the curb in the natural gray along with the gutters.
Right.
And then that's poured usually at one time. And then there are some batch plants that will make it, oftentimes they'll dye it just inside of the cement truck or concrete and then bring that up. And so it is done at a different time, not all at the same time, which we still would likely have, we wouldn't have a monolithic pour with gray, but the idea is that you could pour all of it at the same time.
At the same time.
And one thing that I failed to mention earlier, and again, I'm with Sam, I don't have a dog in this fight. It's really up to the council, that's why we're bringing it to you. But it's important to know that the sidewalk that was ripped up along Spring Street, right there next to the T-lot, that was gray. The portion in front of the Sour McShane all the way down to the Knights of Pythias is gray. And so that is just something to factor into the decision just for this project. And I think then we can go from there.
Handicap ramps require a separate color, right?
We are doing the handicap ramps in a separate,
So it's
in a
gonna be
different color.
multicolored.
Yeah, to distinguish the ramps, yes,
Right, the
exactly.
ramps have to by
And
code. So, we have a motion, we don't have a second.
I second the motion, too. You want to do the red? Just
Red with a broom finish,
Okay, on the Spring Street, without the stamp, right?
without the stamp.
Okay, I second that.
Call the
All in
question.
favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-2.
Thank you.
Red sidewalks. Thank you.
But don't we need to,
Do we have to get rid of this one still?
we have to, I already put one out there anyway.
Yeah, just table this one, and it would be helpful if we had some direction as far as this was a decision about kind of the standards for this project. Is that something you want us to bring back for an actual design standard moving forward?
I would think that a city would want design guidelines.
I think we need a streetscape design standard. If for no other else, the commercial core.
And so I just wanted to ask that, not because I disagree, I think it's one of those things that goes back to our strategic planning is this something, just like we were talking about earlier in the work session, that we want to make a priority now, or it really is not necessarily going to impact us because we're just about done with sidewalk projects for the most part. We replaced nearly all sidewalks in the last few years.
I think it's back burner stuff myself, but.
No, I don't think we have direction to start working and spending money.
motion to table resolution 1909.
The motion to table resolution 1909.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Moving on. Okay, resolution number 19-10, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central, Colorado, approving a non-exclusive revocable license agreement with the Colorado Division of Water Resources for certain city-owned
Yes.
property situated in Clear Creek County.
Mayor, council, before you tonight is resolution 19-10. And the Colorado Division of Water Resources came to the Central City Water Department about a month ago requesting a license agreement to relocate a stream gauging station that was currently located on city-owned property in Clear Creek. The reinstallation of the stream gauge will provide for more accurate upper mountain reservoir data. And a little background on Fall River. The city has water rights that are decreed on Fall River, 2 different ones. And the reason that we were involved and own these 2 properties is because we potentially could develop a diversion pipeline pump station on Fall River. Conceptual designs were made by Deere and Alt and used in diligence cases for filing. We, as the department, wanted to protect the ability to, in the future, build that pipeline and diversion structure. So in the license agreement, we'd added language to protect those rights, and that's why this is a non-exclusive revocable license and on 90-day notice.
Will this help protect our water rights in the future?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I need to know.
I can hear you. Judy, any questions?
I have no questions.
Jack, do you have any questions? Jack, do you have any questions? We're gonna all go with, can get a motion.
I move to approve resolution 1910, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Central Colorado approving a non-exclusive revocable license agreement with the Colorado Division of Water Resources for certain city-owned properties situated in Clear Creek County.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay. Staff updates.
Mr. Mayor, Council, we have some staff updates, reports in your packet, and we'll stand for any questions.
No.
Jeff, do you have any questions for staff at this time?
No, I do not.
Jack said no. Judy?
I do not.
Jack, do you have any questions? I have no questions either. Council comments. Well, 3 minutes. Chopping by 2.
None.
Any council comments, anyone? We do.
Yes, but I think we will be looking at maybe revising that.
That's a good idea. I have a quick comment. I have been working with a group called the Holistic Homestead, and they have a proposal here that I'd like council to look at and just tell me and city staff right now if don't look at this right now, but basically a farmer's market, which would be situated down where Gregory and Lawrence, that Y down there, and that two-tier parking area down there is what we're looking at. And city manager asked me to just get a general feel for, do you guys want a farmer's market starting this summer, if it's economically feasible for the city? That's it.
Let's look at this right now? Or?
No, I'm just, do you in general think that a farmer's market would be good for the city?
The first try didn't work.
That's not the question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it'd be nice.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any comments? There was plenty of time to review all this, but they want to know if it's even their time to look into it.
Doesn't require our permission, does it?
It doesn't, but I want to make sure that we're all on
Not sure I'd ever use a farmer's market, never had, so I'm ignorant. So, it wouldn't hurt, give it a try, that's my thing. What's it gonna happen?
I would appreciate it, looking into it. And then I just want to make one last comment. Jack, I really, really appreciate the homework that you do and the knowledge that you bring to all this. It really helps me feel secure in these motions, so I just want to thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other staff, or I'm sorry, council comments? Okay. Public forum for items not on the agenda. Deb, please.
Deborah, 706 Martin Drive. We're having a 50th anniversary dinner on May 6th. I gave you an invitation. I'd love to see some people there from the city because last year we had one, only Shirley showed up.
I was it. I wasn't.
Last year. And this is our 50th, and we're going to do a whole thing from the very beginning, pictures and what all we've done.
You said we, you didn't say Gilpin History.
Gilpin Historical Society.
Yeah.
If I said that, but, and that just goes along with some other things that we're going to be doing this summer, like the Fairmont Cemetery Crawl, which we'll have a bus. We'll have a bus that Johnny's is going to supply, a big bus. So people from Gilpin County can ride down there and come back. So we didn't forget you.
I'll be there.
So we'd love to see you on May 6th, 7 o'clock at the Maristar. So this is like our fundraising too, you know, and just get people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. McCaskill, Mr. Miera. I'm David Wilson. I'm a member of the law firm Sherman Howard, counsel to the bondholder, HWC Investors. With me today in the rear is, all the way from Atlanta, is Mr. Bill Porter, HWC's representative. As you know, on March 19th, 2019, we attended the City Council planning session meeting and presented the City Council with HWC's serious and substantial concerns regarding the city's failure to honor its obligations under the January 11th, 2001 intergovernmental agreement between the city and the Central City Business Improvement District, which agreement is part of the trust estate under the indenture between the Central City bid and the bond trustee. The bid's lawyer also attended the meeting and presented the same concerns. Against this background, we were surprised to learn of the April 12th, 2019 letter from the city's attorney to the CC Bid's attorney. Rather than address the concerns that the bid and HWC raised, the letter attempts to excuse the city's breaches of its obligations. At the March 19th meeting, both the bid's lawyer and I told the council plainly that the failure to address the bid's and HWC's concerns likely would result in legal action and a default under the indenture. Nothing has changed since March 19th about the bids or HWC's intentions in this regard. Those are my prepared remarks. I'll briefly supplement those. Where does that leave us? The letter that Mr. McCaskill raised with Mr. Cockrell suggests that the city has concerns about the legality of a resolution that this city, or an ordinance that this city council passed that is specifically referenced in the 2001 intergovernmental agreement that this city council approved, and it is also referenced in the bond offering memorandum that was issued to the bondholder, in reliance on which the bondholder bought the bonds that financed the Central City Parkway. We have done some legal research, which the bid's lawyer will supplement and will share with you, but this is not a close issue. It's not a close question. It's a no-brainer. The city has the authority that was indicated in the resolution that was improperly repealed 2 years ago and that resulted in the breach of the intergovernmental agreement. So we'll share that research with you. But here's the second thing that we understand from the letter is that there is a concern expressed that, well, somehow the resolution, or the ordinance rather, was inadequate, and that there needed to be some additions to city codes to also make sure that the city's ability to create conditions requiring a property owner to petition for inclusion in the bid were consistent with that throughout the city's code and other ordinances. I can tell you, based on a meeting this afternoon that we had with representatives of the bid and its lawyers, that the bid representatives would be most happy to meet with Mr. McCaskin and to help the city supplement its code provisions to make sure that they're in compliance with the city's obligations under the intergovernmental agreement. And so what we would ask would be that the council direct staff to engage in that dialogue with the bid with the goal of drafting additional provisions necessary to provide comfort to the city's attorney that there would be enough uniformity across the city's codes and ordinance that would mirror the now repealed Section 7 of the ordinance from 1998. Thank you for your attention.
So I don't think this is the appropriate forum for this conversation. This is public 3-minute process, and to the best of my knowledge, city staff didn't even know that you'd be here tonight, or you, Mr. Porter, and I appreciate you coming all the way out from Atlanta. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying the letter that was received by a third party, not even you, is unacceptable to you. It's just...
Well, the concerns that were raised, and we were very plain about what we said. The bid is currently in breach of the trust indenture as a result of the city's breach of the intergovernmental agreement. The bid's representatives were unable to be at the meeting tonight. We received the letter late on Friday afternoon. And so we apologize to you, Mr. Mayor, and to the council for the lack of notice. But this is a very serious issue, both for the bid and for the bondholder. And no disrespect intended towards our friend Mr. McCaskin, the tone of the letter was a blow-off. It was not a serious effort to address the concerns that we raised, but rather was an effort to obfuscate and to try to justify what was an indefensible position. And so we're happy to have that, but we wanted to come tonight to make sure that our concerns were not swept under the rug, but were a matter of public record, that we're not backing down, and we're very serious, as we said we were 2 weeks ago. And that's with no disrespect to anyone sitting, Mr. Mayor, in your position, or any of your colleagues on the council. But that's where we are.
I appreciate Bill making it from Atlanta when bid members who live 10 miles away couldn't be here.
Well, Mr. Mayor, council members, I think if I might add, from the March 19th meeting, the request was made of Mr. Wilson and also the attorney for the bid. I apologize, I forget his name right now. Paul Cockrell's Associates. But the request. Thank you. So the request was made, or the to have a response. And at that time, City Council took it very serious, had discussions immediately in the executive session, and then also at that point, really just kind of confirmed that the city would respond to the letter by the 16th. And so we could have provided that response tonight. The city chose to do it earlier because it could. And so I don't think that there was any expectation that we were going to have any public discussion about either one of the letters. And so I think that that's something we can continue to discuss. But I think to the mayor's point, this may not be the forum for that discussion.
I'm happy to answer any questions, but I've said what I came to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming out.
Bill, would you like to add to that? You get 3 minutes.
4-4.
I think the way that,
Would you mind, just for recording purposes, coming to the microphone? Thank you.
all right, so my name is Bill Porter, and I'm a CPA out of Atlanta, and I represent the bondholder. Remarks, especially his prepared remarks, are clear and on the record. And then his additional comments after his prepared remarks, essentially, if you go back and listen, he's asking the city council to direct the city manager and Mr. McCaskill, your city attorney, to enter into conversations and discussions with the bid about solving the problem. I don't think that we were expecting any discussion tonight other than for us to clearly communicate to the city council to direct the city's lawyer and the city manager to solve the issues that the bondholder has raised. If in fact we understand Mr. McCaskill's concerns as expressed in his letter, and again, I'm not the lawyer, so I'm talking here as a business guy. If we understand his concerns to be legal questions in terms of the interface of your code with that original ordinance, then the bondholder and the bid have met. We're clear, I think, on the same page. At least that's what I heard in our conversations today. I think we're on this, we, the bid and the bondholder, are on the same page as it relates to our desire to sit down with the city and resolve these issues. But I think the way that David framed it, we're not going to back down from our insistence. We, the bondholder, are not going to back down from our insistence that the bargain that was struck between the bondholder and the bid and the bonds trustee relied on as a foundation, the city's ordinances as they existed at the time the bonds were issued. And if in fact there are legal questions to be resolved because there are interactions between that particular section of the original 2001, if there are inconsistencies, then the city can resolve those inconsistencies. You have the power to resolve those. If the question is not really inconsistencies, but an intention to subvert the value or to diminish the value of the bonds to the detriment of the bondholder, then we'll have no choice but to proceed with actions that will tangle us all up in a bunch of messy stuff that at least from our perspective, the bondholder's perspective, we didn't seek this fight. We're just responding to the actions of this council. And so we're asking for the city council to direct the city's manager and your lawyer to sit down with the bondholder and with the bid and work this out. But working this out is going to be putting Humpty Dumpty back together. We're looking for the foundation of the bargain that was struck in 2002-03 when we funded $45 million to the city. But we're looking for the foundation of that arrangement to be put back the way it was supposed to be.
Thank you for your comments. And thank you. I'll just say for both of them, the idea that we brush this off as an entity of the city is not correct. We've had executive sessions about it. We are concerned about the issue. You know that I, as mayor, look at bondholders as partners in this, and so comments to the language that was brushed off. I even, in reading the letter, I appreciated that it was started and concluded with the concept of we're in agreement that any annexed land for commercial purposes into the city should be subjected to the bid. I'm not saying that on legalese or I'm not trying to defend the letter. I'm saying that was the tone of the letter that I took out of it, and I would have hoped that that would have brought some solace to you. Appreciate you again you coming out, and your comments are noted.
And I think council will get the benefit of having the discussion that I can say I didn't know that the Business Improvement District had a public meeting today. It kind of sounds like maybe they did, and had that discussion about that. And so I think it was our intention to get through the meeting so that we can get to the point that we can then discuss something that we as a group haven't had a chance to do so.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys coming in and everything. I don't know, is there a way we can get together and
There's all sorts of ways.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I think that this is just a recommendation. We do have an executive session. It will allow us to have a discussion. I think there are some things for the record that were not described here as far as what that letter communicated. Jumped over from a certain portion of the beginning to the end. And so I think that it was in all of our best interests to be able to sit down and have that discussion and go over the points and have a fair characterization of the communication.
Are we going to do an executive session today?
Yes.
It would give us the opportunity to discuss what I think we were just starting to discuss here, and we can always cut it short and put it on to one of our next meetings. So, but I think we do have some information to
If there are no other questions of us, and again, we respect that it's just 3 minutes and we wanted to make our statement. So we'll be gone, but I'm in town for a day or two if anybody wants to talk.
And I do have copies of what I read, if you all would receive those.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, have a good evening.
I move to go into executive session under section 24-6-4024E. Is that E? Yeah. Colorado revised statutes to determine positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations and to instruct negotiate proposed amendments to the 1999 Growth IGA Intergovernmental Agreement dated September 29, 1999. And under section 24-6-4024B, Colorado revised statutes to ask specific legal questions related to March 19, 2019 correspondence from council for the Central City Business Improvement District. And I further move to reconvene the April 18th City Council meeting at the conclusion of the executive session to provide instruction to the city staff if required and to adjourn the April 19th regular meeting.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries.